Hey, I'm Three Gnomes. If you know my channel, then you know that I've been making devlogs for a long time, and if you're completely new, that's fine. This video is going to be a compilation of every single devlog I've made for Toby's Topsy Tale, which is the 3D platformer slash psychological horror game that I've been trying to make. And I shouldn't say trying because I have made it. It's coming out in less than a few weeks at this point. It's called Toby's Topsy Tale. You can wishlist it right now on Steam. But the point of these devlogs was to document the process of me making this game and to show the world the process that indie game developers go through to make games. And hopefully this will inspire game developers who are just starting out, who want to get a feel for what it's like. So from Devlog 1 to Devlog 20, every single step of me making this game from the moment that I started making these devlogs is right here. So if you're interested in that, stick around, see the process, get a feel for what it's like to be an indie game developer, and thank you so much for your support. And if you're interested in Toby's Topsy Tale, if it's not out already, you can wishlist it, and if it is out, I hope you'll consider buying. Thank you so much. And let's get into it. Hi, I'm Three Gnomes, and let me introduce you to the world of Toby's Topsy Tale. What you're seeing here are several levels from an indie game I started making with a friend of mine a few years back. You might be asking yourself, okay, well, you've been making this game for years apparently, why isn't it done? And the answer is simple. Originally, I was not a solo game developer, as I am now. I was working, as I said, with a partner who dropped out. The plan from the beginning was that I was going to handle the art side of things, and he was going to handle the programming. I would make the characters and the art and the level design, and he would handle programming and even animation. Now, to be clear, we were starting at ground zero. We had never done anything like this. He had no background in coding, and I had no more background in art than just the straight B's I had gotten in high school art class. That being said, we got to work. He started learning coding, I started learning Blender. Once we were confident that we had the basics down and that we could each do our side of the project, we decided that we would make a Kickstarter with a low goal of only about $1,500, just to make sure that we could cover the software cost, such as substance and things like that. We actually surpassed our funding goal by about $500. He took his half of the money, I took mine, and we got going on this project. We were going to make the game we had always wanted to play. To make a very long story short, let's just say that that didn't end up happening. He dropped out, and now I am at a precipice where I have got to make the art and the programming and essentially every single thing in this game by myself. So what is Toby's Topsy Tale? It is a horror-based 3D platformer in the style of the classic games you know and love, such as Psychonauts and Super Mario 64. That's the basic premise. You play as this little gingerbread man named Toby as you explore a house that leads into little magical levels hidden all throughout. That's the basics of the game. So what do I currently have done? Well, I've got multiple levels done, and I have quite a few character models completed. However, I do not have animations, I do not have any of the coding, and I do not even have a character model that moves. So step 1 is teaching myself Playmaker. Step 2 is... Okay, wait. So step 1 is actually going to be multiple steps. I got to teach myself Playmaker, but the way I've got to do that, or the way that I'm planning to do that, is to use animations that I'm going to make for Toby, the main character, to create a working player character. And in doing so, hopefully give myself a very basic grasp of how Playmaker works. So all of that is just step 1. And then from there, we're going to move on to everything else that the game needs. I still got a couple more levels to make. I still got to make enemies that function. I also have to make... I have to make so much. But it's okay. We're going to get this done, and hopefully, if you follow these devlogs, you're going to be right there for everything that I do. So thank you for watching, and hopefully you like and subscribe so that you can keep up with the progress of Toby's Topsy Tale. Thank you. I decided to start with the basics, taking our main character, Toby, a little gingerbread man, and making a camera move around him. Now, since I don't know anything about coding, and the game doesn't require anything too complex, I'm going to be using Playmaker to make the game work. So step one is making a capsule collider for Toby. To be clear, I have never used any of these systems before, not Playmaker, not Cinema Machine, not any of this, so I'm starting at ground one. In fact, I've never even gone through the animation workflow, so it's all going to be a learning process. So after I had the capsule collider set up, I set up the camera, which worked perfectly. I'm just kidding, it didn't move at all. So I figured I did something wrong, I went through the settings, I tried again, and nope, it still didn't work. And at this point I was getting frustrated. This should have been the most basic thing, setting up a camera just to move around the character. Not even movement yet, just the camera. And then I think I realized the problem. Not to throw blame on my ex-partner, because it's definitely possible I was just an idiot, but the small amount of coding that he had sent me for the game, I thought could possibly be messing things up. So I decided to take this opportunity to go ahead and upgrade to the newer version of Unity. So I made a new file, imported Toby, went through the same process to set up the camera, and voila, it worked. It wasn't perfect, but I knew with some fiddling I could get it exactly where I wanted it. So then I decided to move on to movement. And without animations, I used Playmaker to set up a very basic movement set. However, I realized that it wasn't in relation to the camera, so I fixed that next. After that, I also set it up so that when he moves, he turns to face the direction that he's moving. This is called a smooth look at. If the game had any sort of shooting required in it, this system wouldn't work, but for our purposes, this works fine. After that, I decided it was time to set up just a basic jump, and I got it going, I jumped, and I wasn't sure exactly why this was happening, but I figured it had something to do with a vector that I had set up, which basically increases the movement speed down after the jump. I'm pretty sure this was meant to simulate gravity, but what it was simulating was that. I decided to remove this setting, and after that, the jump worked fine. I did eventually come back to this later and fiddle with it a little bit, but basically that's what I did to fix this problem. For my own entertainment, I also fiddled with setting the velocity multiplier to 0.4 to simulate what ended up being a kind of glide effect. However, I did manage to talk myself out of feature creep and decided I did not need a glide in this game, as cool and fun as I think they are. So at this point, I had Toby moving and I had the camera moving around him. It was all basic, but it was essentially what I wanted, just without animations. That being said, he was doing all of this in a blank void, a sample scene. All of the levels I had already created for this game were in the old file from the 2019 version of Unity, and so I went back and exported just the kitchen scene to see how it would transfer. At this point, I had no idea how many errors I was going to face trying to do this, but thankfully when I got the scene in, everything looked perfect. However, because I am hated by God, somehow importing this kitchen level erased everything I had done in the sample scene, meaning the player controller that I had just made for Toby was gone. So I had to recreate everything I had just done. And as frustrating as that sounds, I like to think of it as a learning experience. And it is this optimism alone that maintains my sanity. Now that I had the camera and the movement set up, it was time to tackle the thing that I had been fearing the most: animation. Originally, I had been planning on doing the animations for Toby first, since he's the main character, but then I realized that that is a nightmare and a mistake, so I took one of the little collectible cookies and decided I'll start by making that spin. And believe it or not, somehow I got the process right, and I knew that because when I imported it to Unity, it actually showed that there was an animation attached to the file I had imported. So figuring out the process of importing animations from Blender to Unity, check. Now I had to figure out how to make them function within Unity. I made my first animation controller for the cookie, as you can see here, so that when it starts, it just continually spins. At this point, I thought I had the very basic animation for the cookie working, and I gave it a try. But, like the nightmare that is my existence, of course, it did not work. After trying a few times, I did realize that when you start the game, the animation would play one time, and then stop. And that's when I realized you simply have to hit the loop button in the animation to make it continuously go. And with that, I finally had something animated in this game. I have this little quirk where when I put something new in the game, sometimes I'll just put a bunch of them everywhere to see how they look. So I did that with the cookie, and it was honestly so much fun finally seeing movement in this game. I then followed the exact same procedure to make the coins move, and then I copied them absolutely everywhere and looked around at a world that was alive and moving. Now that I'd spent some time making some things happen in the kitchen, I decided it was time for a change of scenery. And so I imported the fridge level into this project. Now, for some reason when I first imported it, the water shader made it so that everything in the game had their normals flipped. For those of you who don't know a lot about games, normals essentially affect what side of an object you're seeing. So essentially I was seeing every single thing in this level inside out. So I just removed the water shader and everything was working perfectly. Now I had a new level to work in for a little while, which was honestly pretty exciting. My next goal was to make an animation that was a little more complicated. Since I was still too scared to mess with Toby, and I hadn't made anything physical for the game in a while, to work with these animations I would create a new character based on some concept art that I had. So I started modeling the Lovecraftian orb Eligor. My goal was only to create 2 animations, one an idle and the other a hit for when your character collides with him. If you're interested in seeing the whole process just sped up, I did upload a video of that on this channel. So I created the animations and then I imported it to Unity. Using both Playmaker and the animation workflow, I actually got it working pretty well. And now I have a very simple character, fully animated, technically. And that's where I am with this project right now. Some of my immediate future goals at the moment include setting up the camera rig so that it doesn't go through objects, setting up a more complicated character with animations, and hopefully just learning Playmaker and the entire workflow better in general. If you're interested in this project, make sure you subscribe so you can follow this devlog series and learn other things about the game as we go. If you like this video or you didn't like this video, make sure you like or comment down below to let me know what I did wrong, which I'm sure is a lot because I'm learning. That being said, let me know your thoughts on what you're seeing in the game so far. Thank you for watching and have a very Topsy week. No, cut that. That's really... that's so stupid. Oh, I don't need to sign off. So the first thing I wanted to do next was make a little more complicated character to put in the game. So I decided to create Tilly the Turnip. Tilly would have 3 animations: an idle, a hit, and a death. And this is just so I could get a little more practice with the system. Next up was the process of importing him into Unity. Once there, I gave him the basics he would need as an enemy, a rigid body and a collider. I then made his animation controller and attached an animator component to him. However, of course, it wasn't working the first time. I realized that the problem I was having was because I had attached the animator component to the empty that he was a child of. So I took it and attached it directly to his model, and sure enough, it was working perfectly. Well, not perfectly. For some reason, the looping of the animation was very wonky. After fiddling with the animations for a little bit, I realized that the problem came from the way that I had done things in Blender. You see, in Blender, anything you put before the 0 is just not going to show up in the render. However, when you import it to Unity, it just makes an animation out of every single mark that you've made in the timeline. I fiddled with the animation frame count for a while before realizing I could pretty much just hit loop pose and it would work automatically. Now that I had the idle animation going, I decided to play around a little bit and see how it looked, and I realized quickly that when you bump into the character, you can essentially just move it based on the rigid body settings that I had. And it looked pretty ridiculous, honestly. I messed around with it a little bit, and then I went on to testing how the other animations looked in the software. That being the hit by the player animation and the death animation, which honestly kind of broke my heart to look at. After bringing her back to life, I now had all the animations set up. At this point, she was pretty much done, but I wanted to give her that sparkle in her eyes. Literally, I essentially wanted to make a specular map so that her eyes would be reflective, and the rest of it would be kind of more of a matte texture, like what you see here. I thought that would just give her a little more pop, and make her feel more alive and fun to look at. Finally, being pretty much satisfied with my turnip, I decided to turn my attention to 2 other problems I had been looking to address. First of all, the camera that rotated around Toby I thought was way too close on him. It kind of felt claustrophobic now that there were other enemies around. I decided I would fix this by extending the radius on the middle rig of the camera. Secondly, I felt like the grass in this part of the fridge world was way too long. It felt unnatural and unkempt, and this area is supposed to be clean and nice. So I just trimmed it down to a smaller height, and with these 2 fixes in place, I thought the game was already looking a lot better. Since I was already in the settings for the camera, I decided to fix a problem I outlined in the last video, which is that the camera can currently go through objects and even the terrain. Thankfully, there was an extension built directly into Cinemachine that takes care of this for me. And so with that in place, I decided to start testing it. On a base level, it did pretty much exactly what I wanted it to do. However, anytime anything came between the player and the camera, it would jump around to make it work. This seemed very unnatural, especially in situations where the camera is only blocked for about a fraction of a second. It would still jump forward. It was very disorienting. So in the settings, I messed with a couple things that seemed to fix that. First of all, I made a slight delay where the camera has to be blocked for a fraction of a second before it'll activate and fix the problem. That makes it so that when you're just spinning the camera around the character, you don't have to worry about a small thing just being right in the way and it jumping forward. I also made the settings so that there was also a smooth, quick transition from the place where it's blocked to the place where it's going. This made it feel less jumpy and like it was naturally moving to the place it needed to be. Finally, I made this entire extension not be affected by objects that are a certain closeness to the character, so that if an enemy is right next to you when you're about to hit it, the camera won't jump between you and the enemy. It'll move smoothly around them because the enemy is right next to you. All in all, I think this fixed all of the camera problems that I had, and it finally felt like I had a smooth system in place. At this point, I set my sights on something I knew would be a lot more complicated: the health system. To give a very brief overview, essentially what I did was create an FSM called Health, which would start with waiting for an enemy to hit, and then when an enemy collided, it would look at the variable created attached to the enemy that determines how much damage it deals to your character, and then it would reduce that amount of damage from your health, leaving your current health at whatever it should be. After that, all of this would loop again and again until your current health finally hits 0, and then it would go to the dead state. I also added some things that would affect the player when they take damage, such as being knocked backwards and blinking momentarily, as well as not being able to take additional damage for a few seconds. With everything finally set up, I popped into the game to give it a try, and it worked perfectly. I'm just kidding, it didn't work at all. This was mainly just because I had attached the rigid body and the capsule collider to the empty, the same as I had done with the animator, so I simply had to move those down to the actual turnip model. After that, it was actually working. Clunky, but it worked. Now it was time to fine-tune these issues. Problem number one was that when you collided with the enemy, it wouldn't knock you back in relation to yourself, it would just alter your numerical position on the X and Z scale by -5. The blinking effect was entirely too long, as was the length of time you were invulnerable to damage. And finally, nothing really happened when you died, except that you could no longer move. I started by shortening the length that the character blinked, and the amount of time that they were invulnerable. Then I altered the knockback effect, where when you take damage, you are pushed backwards in relation to your own orientation. I would come back to what happens when you die later, because right now I was motivated to make a health bar. First, I took the candy cane health bar image that I had previously created and put it on the UI canvas, so that it would constantly be at the top left of the screen. Then I created a slider that would erase it in chunks from the right over, and I used an FSM to attach that to the value of your current health. So when your current health is at 4, the slider is at 4, which is full, and then when your current health goes down to say 2, the slider goes down to 2, showing the health bar at half. At this point I had it functional, but I didn't like how it just kind of disappeared. I wanted it to look like the candy bar was breaking apart and emptying out as the health bar depleted. To do that, I made a second image, which was essentially a hollowed out, broken version of the candy cane, and put that underneath so that as the slider depleted, it would look like the candy cane was hollowing out. And honestly, I absolutely loved how this turned out. It was the exact feeling I was going for this game. And finally, it felt like I had a real game that I had made and that I was playing. The final thing I wanted to do before I took a break was make something actually happen when you die. I decided to go the simple route and make it so that when you entered the dead state, the camera would fade out to a dark red, a kind of bloody feel. It's not perfect and there's a lot more work to do, but I was happy with the progress that I had made. Make sure to let me know in the comments below any thoughts you had on the project, and if you're interested in following the progress of this game, make sure you subscribe so that you don't miss anything. Also, make sure you comment down below anything you think I should work on next. Thank you for watching, and I'm not going to do my stupid sign off this time. Bye guys. That was my phone. It's the Yoshi. It's the Yoshi tongue sound effect. That's definitely not a good sign off. The first thing I decided to fix was something that someone had pointed out to me, which was that the skybox was backwards, with the sun being on the opposite side of the direction that the light was coming from. So I flipped this and voila, suddenly the sunlight was actually coming from the sun. Looked a lot better. Next, I added one of the little gold coins that I had made spin in one of the last videos to the scene. However, currently it doesn't actually do anything. There's no script to let you collect it. So I would come back to that. First, I wanted to make it so that when you collided with Tilly the turnip, she would play the hit animation to make it feel like you actually collided with her. And honestly, in terms of how the game feels, that actually added a lot. While I wasn't ready to tackle any sort of actual enemy AI, I did want to make her feel a little more alive. So what I did simply was just make it so that she would constantly try and spin to follow you. I also made the speed that she rotates a little slower than the speed that the player moves to make it feel like she was kind of sluggish and kind of just curiously trying to see where you're going. Next, I wanted to make it so that the out of bounds area in the level, such as the milk at the bottom of this fridge world, would be an instant kill if you collided with it, so that you wouldn't jump off the level and try and just go exploring. I also used the same system of dealing damage to the player to make it so that other objects in the world could also hurt you if you touch them, such as falling into a blacksmith forge. Obviously, that should hurt you, and now it could. Next, I wanted to make the coin actually collectible. In Playmaker, I made the first state a wait to be collected state. I attached a collider to the coin so that if you got close to it, it would activate, and it would send to the next state, which was collected. When it was sent to the collected state, I made it so that the coin would actually disappear, so that it was actually collected. I gave that a test in the game engine, and it disappeared, meaning I had done everything correct so far. I also made it so that in the collected state, it would raise the global variable, coins collected, by 1. You start with the variable coins collected at 0, and then after you go through the object, it raises it to 1. I duplicated the coins around to make sure that when you went through them, they would continuously add 1 to the coin count. And thankfully, as I went through one by one, it continued to raise the number. To make it feel better to pick up, I also added a sound effect, which was essentially just me walking in the kitchen and dropping a coin next to a mic. However, when you go through the coin and it makes a sound like this, it actually does feel pretty good, meaning I now had a collectible coin. Next, I decided to make a different type of collectible, a health pickup, so that after you took damage, you could heal yourself. This was a little bit of a different collectible, but essentially it worked the same way, only the variable that it changed wasn't adding 1 to the coin collector, it was adding 1 to your current health. However, I also had to set it so that if your current health was already at max, it wouldn't be able to be picked up. That was pretty easy to set up by just making it compare your current health to your max, and if it was already there, then it wouldn't pick up. Now I had a collectible coin and a health pickup, which also had its own sound effect. Next, I drew a coin and a cookie that would serve as the UI for what you were collecting, and positioned them underneath the candy cane. Now I just had to make the number of how many you'd collected actually appear next to them, which actually turned out to not be nearly as complicated as I expected. I fiddled with the positioning of everything a bit so that I would have more room for the counter when I started collecting the cookies as well. After that, I made the big cookie collectible, which serves as the main collectible in the game, similar to stars in Super Mario 64, and then I made it so that the number of how many of those you've collected would also show up. Now I had the basic UI completely finished. At this point, I turned my attention back to controlling Toby and added a double jump, something I had always wanted in the game. Before I did anything else, I did want to try something that one of my subscribers, Lance, recommended, which was making the grass look darker. I gave it a try, and sure enough, it actually did look a lot better, so thank you, Lance. After that, I went back to fiddling with Toby's controls. When I was first making Toby's basic controls, I accidentally set up a float effect to make it look like he was gliding. And I mentioned in that video that I probably shouldn't add that because it was pretty much just feature creep. But at this point in the process, I realized that was something that I thought would be a really fun unlockable control for you to have. So I added it to the game. And suddenly, the FSM for Toby's controls went from this to this. It got a lot more complicated really fast. It also got a lot more complicated when I decided that I wanted the double jump to also be an unlockable control. Essentially at this point, for the double jump and the glide, I had it checking constantly to see if you could actually do those, which added several more states to this FSM. And at this point, I realized that I had procrastinated as long as I possibly could, and it was finally time to face my fears and actually animate Toby. After spending a full day working on this process, I put them in Unity and set up the first animation, his idle state. He's just vibing. You might also have noticed that I added a candy cane to his design, which was always part of the plan so that he would have something to hit with. I set it up so that it looks okay with every animation in the game, but I'm honestly considering just making it invisible and just kind of pop out of thin air when you attack. That way it's not constantly on screen, but for now I'm just going to leave it and see what you guys think. So make sure to comment your thoughts. Next, in the animation tab, I created a blend tree so that it would naturally go from his idle to like a walking state, depending on how fast he was moving. I thought this looked pretty good. Although it did look weird when he jumped. To make things easier on myself, I took the two FSMs that controlled his movement, one that's just called movement and one that was jumping, and I combined them into one FSM. That made things a lot easier for purposes of animation and for controlling him in general. Now I could set up his animation for jumping. It was a smooth transition that went from his idle or his walk to the jump and then back. Next, I set up the animation for his double jump, which was kind of a front flip type thing. It's kind of backwards from what most games do with a flip double jump. And my girlfriend hates it, but I think it's a really quirky, weird thing that kind of fits with the way that this game is supposed to be just odd and unnatural sometimes. What do you think? Comment down below. Now that the jump and double jump were set up, it was time to set up the glide animation, which essentially is just him lowering himself down flat, flattening himself out to get a bunch more air resistance, although admittedly it does kind of look like Peter Pan, and then when he collided with the ground, he would go back to his idle move animation. I had a fun idea to make this more interesting, but it was tied into the next animation that I was going to make, which was my absolute favorite. You press the fall button and he just falls directly flat on his face, and he stays there until you let go. And then if you're moving and you hit this button, he still falls on his face, but he maintains a little bit of the velocity of when you first fell. He also can't move in any way other than to get up after you fall on your face. While this was partially set up to be comical, it also had a function that I really wanted to get into the game, which was a kind of duck effect. So what I did was make it so that when you go on your face, the capsule collider actually shrinks down to about the size of where your body is. So very, very small. And with that, you can duck under enemies swinging at you, or you could now slide into previously inaccessible areas. Now that I had this set up, I could do what I finally wanted to do with the glide. First, let me explain that the button that you press when you're standing, Q, that makes you fall on your face, is the same button you press when you're in the air to glide. So when you're gliding, if you just keep that button held down as you hit the ground, you'll actually just go directly into the fall on your face state. And you'll stay there on the ground with your smaller capsule collider until you let go of the button, and then you'll go back to your idle state. Ultimately, I felt like it just gave the player a lot more options in terms of mobility, and it made the game feel a lot more fun to just move around. Next, I set up his fun spin attack animation and made it so that you don't take damage when you're attacking. However, currently, even though it looks like Tilly is being hurt by the attack, I don't have anything in place that actually deals damage when you attack. So I'll be dealing with that in the next video. The last thing I did was make sure that he could go into the attack state from almost any other animation. I don't really want the character to ever feel limited on when they can attack. You could attack directly from the glide animation, or I made it so that even if you're falling on your face, you can go directly into the attack from there as well. So now you could slide right under enemies and then pop up and hit them and not take any damage as long as you get out of their range quick enough. This made your movement and your ability to attack feel very versatile, and honestly, I really loved it. And that is pretty much it for this week's devlog. Make sure you let me know in the comments what you think, or if you have any suggestions. Some things I'm looking to do in the next videos are set up a dialogue box, make your attack actually deal damage to enemies, and start looking into some post-processing things to make the level look a little bit better in general. Thank you for watching, make sure to like and subscribe, and I still don't have any type of sign-off. So, bye, I guess. In the past month, I've taken this game from just being levels that I'd created to having a fully functional character that is now animated, as well as having collectibles and even a health system that functions. The first thing I wanted to do this week was go through and make it so that your character could deal damage to enemies. After all, what's the point of having enemies if you can't murder them violently? I set up just a really basic system that used a variable for how much damage you're dealing to enemies, so that later I could make it possible for you to deal more damage if you get upgrades or things like that, possibly even new weapons. Basically, this entire system works by making it so that when you attack, a trigger will spawn around your character, and if an enemy goes into that trigger, they will take the damage from your damage value, reducing their health. And at its most basic level, that's how it works. I already had it set up so that when Tilly takes damage, she plays the hit animation. Now I had to make it so that she would go to the dead state when her health hits 0 or goes under 0, and then of course play her death animation so that she can die. To make it feel more like you've actually killed something, I made it so that her capsule collider disappears, but after she plays her death animation, she kind of just lays there for a few seconds before finally actually disappearing. I wouldn't want you to forget that you just murdered a cute innocent little creature, now would I? To give you even further incentive to commit homicide in my game, I also made it so that when you do kill Tilly, you're rewarded with 3 gold coins. After all, you're supposed to kill everything if it gives you coins, right? Obviously, you were supposed to do that, weren't you? I mean, the game rewarded you for it. So then why do you feel bad? Or maybe you don't. I guess that's up to you. Anyways, the next thing I wanted to do was make the world look a little bit better in general. I wanted the colors to pop, I wanted things to just look better. So I decided to add some post-processing to the level. The first step was adding atmospheric fog, which is kind of how things look in real life. After that, I set up ambient occlusion, depth of field, and color grading to make the entire level pop better. The results were pretty subtle, but ultimately that's what I was going for. But when you look at them side by side, you can definitely tell that the post-processing really adds a lot to the scene. One of the very smart people that view my videos, called Dare Babonnet, mentioned that the movement of my character seemed kinda jittery, and helped me fix it by recommending that I change the update method in my game to a fixed update, and sure enough, it actually started working instantly better. So thank you, Dare Babonnet. And I'm sure I said that wrong. Next, I wanted to add some logic to something in the game world. I decided that the first thing I was going to mess with was the bridge that goes between the Healthy Kingdom and the Snack Kingdom. Ideally, when you start this level, it should be down, and you have to flip a switch in the castle to make it come up so that you can access the snack level. So I just set a global variable attached to it that would make it so that when that's triggered, it would come up. Now I had a bridge that actually went up and down based on what you, the character, did, and thus something in my game had logic. After that, I made a second camera that would zoom in based on what your character did, so that if you opened a dialog box, for instance, it would zoom in on what the character's looking at. It was pretty easy to set up, but it did make the game feel so much more polished. And considering I've only been programming this game for a little over a month, polish wasn't really something I was expecting to get, or even get close to for that matter. Next up was making it feel like you actually took damage when you get hit. To accomplish this, I made it so that when you collided with an enemy and took damage, the edges of the screen would flash red and cracked and bloody. I tried this out and it looked pretty good, but I think it lasted too long, so I made it just a quick effect that pops up. And now it actually felt like you were being hurt when you took damage. Now that it felt good to look at stuff, kill stuff, and die, I decided to add in some more fun effects to the game. Specifically, I'd been wanting to add in specialized unlockable skins. Otherwise, what's the point of collecting things if they don't unlock something in the game that's fun to have? So I made the skins and made them attached to variables so that you could change them at will throughout the game based on what you'd unlocked, and it was honestly a lot of fun setting all of this up. I played around with some particle effects, like kicking up dust when Toby runs, but ultimately decided I didn't like how that feels. But since I was already in the particle systems, I decided to add smoke to the chimneys in this little village that's in the Healthy Kingdom. Suddenly the village felt alive, and it was super cute. Doesn't it feel like there's some cute little strawberry or something just making cakes in that house? To make you feel even worse about brutally assaulting cute little Tilly with your candy cane, I added a sound effect so that now she squeals when you smack her. I know you're still gonna hit her, but now, hopefully you feel a little worse about doing it. But why should she be the only one that squeals in pain when she takes damage? Now, there were clear audio cues for when both of you took damage, and if you think that's fun, just wait till you hear what it sounds like when you die. What a fun, cute little game we're playing, right? And I hear what you're saying. 3 gnomes, you can't make us feel bad about killing an enemy in a 3D platformer. That's what you're supposed to do. It's not like we know anything about Tilly. She's just an enemy there to hit. So next I decided to add a dialogue box so that she could greet you directly, introduce herself, be real friendly, and then you can decide whether or not you kill her. So the dialog box was set up, but next I had to make it so that the camera would actually zoom in on it. Otherwise, what's the point of making that special camera for this specific purpose? With that in place, now you could greet this friendly little creature that you could also murder. The system I used to make the dialog box was set up so that when you collide with an object that triggers the dialog box, that object tells the dialog box what to say and shows the custom image that I drew and attached to that object. So therefore, everything could be unique while using the same setup. To make sure it worked with other things, I also made the sign that's at the beginning of the fridge world, directing you to the snack level, also have a pop-up dialogue, and of course its own unique image I drew. Now in terms of gameplay, it makes sense that when you walk up to a creature and they start talking to you, a dialogue box should pop up. However, for things like signs and other things that you choose to interact with, I needed to make sure that you had the ability to do that, and that every time you walked up to something, it didn't just pop up in your way. So I made a separate option for signs and similar things, so that when you walk up to them, an interact prompt pops up on the bottom of the screen, and when you hit that button, then the dialogue option pops up. However, you could just walk away. That felt a lot more natural, and it made it feel like you could interact with the world a lot more. And so I made a lot more things in the world interactable. The next step was making things even more complicated by making the dialogue options that pop up dependent on things you have done in the world. For instance, when you first interact with this door in the village, this dialogue option pops up. However, if you've killed the king of this level, a different dialogue option will pop up when you approach the door. Now, your actions directly affect what people say to you and the way they interact with you. But killing the king, that's such a big idea. What if I brought it closer to home and made something you do right now in the game directly affect what happens? So now, when you first walk up to this other door in the Healthy Village, this dialogue pops up. And then let's say you go and beat Tilly violently to death, then you go back to the door, and this dialogue option will pop up. Isn't it just so much fun the impact you can have on the world through your actions? And that was a good start, but for my severed head snowman friend here, I needed to give him a lot more options so that it would really feel like he was alive and talking to you based on the things that you had done. So when you first walk up to him, he'll say this. And then, if you've killed Tilly and you go back, he'll say this. And then, if you've killed the king and you go back to him, he'll say this. And now the severed ice cream snowman head was truly alive and talking to you about the things that you had done. And I was almost done, but believe it or not, it was going to get more complicated because now I had to give you the option to make a choice when interacting with something. So let's go through it. So you see this podium and you walk up to it, and when you interact with it, it gives you a question and 2 options, donate or don't donate. So let's say that you decide not to donate. So you leave and make your way up to the big imposing castle and walk up to the doors. But it says this. So you go back down to the podium and try to donate, but you don't realize that you don't have enough coins. So when you hit the donate button, it tells you this. So you go and collect the coins that you need, come back, and now you can donate. And now that you've donated, you go back up to the castle, and they let you in. And now you have access to the new level, the interior of the Avocado Castle. And now, beyond just dialogue, you could directly interact with the world by making choices. And that's important for this game. And that's pretty much it for this week's devlog. Make sure you let me know in the comments what you think, and make sure you like and subscribe so that you follow the project, and so that I know you're liking what you're seeing. This is also the second video in a row where I've had to thank a commenter for fixing a problem I've had in the game. I promise you, I really value your input, so please comment. And if you're not subscribed, and it says that most of you aren't, make sure you subscribe. Anyways, I'll stop going with all this. Thank you for watching. Seriously, thank you so much. I'm 3 Gnomes, and eventually I'm going to come up with a cool sign-off. But for now, peace out, y'all. I'm from Tennessee, so y'all isn't as weird. This is the first level that I've been working on, which has 2 essential kingdoms. A health food kingdom with gold and luxury and green grass and a super friendly atmosphere, except for how much they hate the kingdom next to them. And the other is the snack food kingdom, which has obviously been devastated by the turmoil of war brought about by the healthy kingdom. And if you've seen any of my other devlogs, you know that we have spent a lot of time in this healthy kingdom. So I decided early on that this week was going to be the week I added new levels to the game. But before I started with that, there were a couple more things I wanted to do in the fridge world. First, I had never really worked with the animation system in Unity. Pretty much all the animations that I had done had been manually done in Blender and then imported to Unity. But I knew that you could do it in Engine. So the first thing I did was take a wooden spoon and turn it into a platform that moved up and down in this little hidden area back here where there's the cheese forge. And I did manage to get that moving just fine. However, when the character jumped on it and it moved up and down, it was really glitchy. So I did some research, fiddled with the logic settings in the game, and then everything was working relatively smoothly. The next thing that I wanted to do before I moved on to the new levels was create what could be used as a bounce pad later in the game. Now I didn't actually make an object that would go along with this, but I did set up the trigger system, so now when your player collided with anything that was tagged as bounce, it would launch him into the air. And so from this point on, I could not procrastinate any longer, and it was time to finally add the kitchen level, which is the hub world, to my game. So I imported the level that I had created in an older system into this new game file, and brought in the systems that I had made in the fridge world to this kitchen hub world level to make sure that everything was still going to work smoothly, and tried it out. And thankfully all the systems that I had created in the fridge world still seemed to be working. I even imported Tilly to make sure that that would work smoothly, although she kind of looks pretty out of place in this more realistic setting. So I killed her off. Now, in this hub world, and in several other parts of the game, there are barriers in place to keep you from progressing until you have a certain number of cookies collected. For instance, the baby gate between the kitchen and the rest of the house is the first block that you'll probably encounter. And so I need something to pop up to tell you that you're not going to be able to get through that until you have 3 cookies collected. It was easy enough to make a sprite that had the number you need to collect and the sprite that I'd already made for the cookie, and put it in place in front of the baby gate to let you know that's what you need. However, I did feel like that would look pretty weird and out of place if it was always up. So I set up a basic trigger around the baby gates that when you approach it, that icon pops up letting you know what you need to progress, and then disappears when you walk away from it. With this in place, I now had a way for the players to inherently know what they're looking for in this game to progress, and thus an inherent goal was created for the player: collect cookies. And with that set up, I now had to make it so that when you did collect 3 cookies, the baby gate, blocking you from going into the rest of the house, would be gone, opening up an entire new world for you to explore, if I had added colliders to it, but I'd come back to that. The other thing in this little kitchen area that needed this same type of setup was the little magical gingerbread door that leads into the fridge world level. This one only requires 1 cookie to open. So I set it up and made it so that when you collect that 1 cookie, it disappears, and it offers an interact option at this point, which don't let this camera fading to black trick you, it actually is not set up to actually take you to another level yet. I'll have to set that up at a later point. Next up, to make it actually feel like you were opening up a magical new level, the door needed to open. Thankfully, earlier this week, I had learned that nifty little animation tool in Unity, and so it was pretty easy to set it to open when you approached it and closed when you walked away. And in the game, it felt really natural. Thank God I had managed to not mess up opening a door. At this point, I was tired of the camera just fading to black, and I was ready to actually make it go from one scene to the other when you interacted with the door. I set it up on what I thought would work, which was just fading the camera out to white and then transferring to the next scene, and I tried that out. And it did this. And it stayed like this for 33 seconds before popping into the fridge world. And that was when I realized I was probably going to have to set up a loading screen. And to be honest, that was kind of fun, but it did pose some problems. So what I actually did was make it so that when you interact with the fridge world door, it would set a global variable to the property of the level that you were going to, and then transfer it to the loading scene. And you'd be able to go to that loading scene immediately because there was almost nothing in it. And from there, this loading scene would look at the variable that you had set before, which was fridge world level, and then load that scene up for you. And voila, you're in the fridge world. And obviously, there's a long way to go with this loading screen, but it was a basic start to just make things feel better when you're playing. Now that you could go through the door from this side, I set it up in the fridge world so that you could go back to the kitchen, using the same loading screen system. However, when you go back to the kitchen, it just resets the scene to the very beginning. So you're not even near the door that you came through, and anything that you had already collected in that scene is still there, even though it should be gone. So obviously fixing all of that would be my next goal. Now the coins in the game are fine. If you collect multiple of those every time you go back to a level, that's fine. However, the cookies, which are like the power stars in Super Mario 64, it would be very game-breaking if every time you went back to a level, the cookies that you'd already collected were still there and could be collected again. So I set a global variable that is checked when you collect the cookie, and so if you go back to this level, that variable can be looked at, and if it has been collected, it's gone. So now, things that you collect on a level, if you go back, are actually gone. Since it worked on the cookie, I decided to also test this on Tilly, so that if you killed her in the fridge world and left and went back, she should also be gone. It's really important in this game that your actions and the things that you do are remembered, because they impact a lot of other things in the game. For instance, if you kill Tilly, the snowman character will reference it. So it's kind of weird if you went back and she was still there. And with this new system in place, she wasn't. When she was dead, she would always be gone when you came back to this level. There was still one more level, however, that I wanted to add to the game, and that was the inside of this imposing avocado castle. And so I brought that level into this game file and made it so that now you could enter the avocado castle interior. And inside of here are lots of goodies. Maps, gold, a throne, eventually the king will be here, and a lever that'll let you open the bridge between the two worlds. But that's for later. Now I had multiple levels that had multiple doors into the same fridge world level, so I needed to make it so that the game would know which door you had come out of, and start that scene with you outside the right door. This made the game feel so much more real, and actually made it feel like you were going in and out of doors, instead of just loading a level and unloading a level. It was very satisfying. If you find any of this interesting, make sure you like and subscribe so that you don't miss any more of the things that I'm working on. It really means a lot to me. And comment down below. That's pretty much all I did this week for this devlog. So thank you for watching. I'm 3Gnomes, and I swear eventually I'm going to come up with a cool sign off, a cool thing to say, like 3Gnomes out, or not, not that. Something. I'll come up with something. If you have any ideas, comment down below. I'm floundering here. The first thing that I wanted to do this week was add in a level called the Pantry level, which is based off a pantry. This serves as kind of a tutorial area for the game, and it's also where you're supposed to meet your first NPC. I started by just adding it to this game file. To be clear, I've already made several levels in another game file from an older version of Unity, and now that I'm adding coding to this game and fully fleshing it out, I'm just pretty much importing them to this version of Unity. So the pantry level was already made, I just had to bring it in and tweak it. Now the level is in place, however there isn't any coding attached to anything in this level, except the player. Since this was an area meant to teach you and for you to play around with, one of the first things I did was set up a rigid body system for a few of the objects in the world so that you could interact with them. I thought since this was the tutorial area, it would be great to encourage you to play around and see what interacting with things in the world does. I started with a can, with some minor issues at first. I eventually did get it working exactly how I wanted. Now that the can was functional, I also wanted to make this box over here in the middle also able to be interacted with, although ideally it should be a little heavier. And thus, your character in this tutorial area could now move things and bump into things and interact with the world in a totally new way, other than just pressing the interact button or hitting. And that's where I started with the pantry level. The next basic thing that I wanted to set up was making it so that you could actually go back and forth between this pantry level and the kitchen hub world level. For example, when you walk up to the pantry door in the kitchen hub world area, you can now go directly into the pantry, and then you can go from the pantry back out into the kitchen hub world. And you'll be placed right outside the pantry door, which is where logistically you should be. Ideally, it all just kind of makes sense when you're playing. And now it was time to add some mechanics to the pantry. Specifically, when I originally designed the game, I had a ladder system in place. However, eventually I decided that bounce pads were the way to go. I thought that fit the tone of a 3D platformer a lot better. So now I had to replace this ladder. And I thought for a while about what would be a good bounce pad for this level. First, I thought about the idea of a kitchen scale, however I didn't want it to be something really big and bulky. I wanted it to be just a little small bounce pad you could jump on, but something that would fit naturally into this environment. So I did what I always do, and I just googled some vague terms that fit the tone of the game. Like vintage pantry, for example. And while scrolling through, I noticed these little jars that are sometimes covered with some type of cloth. And of course my brain immediately went, okay, yeah, that's something that your character could logistically bounce off of, almost like a sort of trampoline. And so I started making one. And I use Blender for my 3D modeling, so I made the jar in there. Thankfully it has a nice little cloth system that got me that nice realistic look of the fabric on top, and then it was just texturing it and importing it into the game. And in one of my previous videos, I had set up a bounce system for Toby, so that I could just apply the bounce trigger to almost anything in the world to make that happen. So now the jar was a bounce pad. However, when he did bounce, I hadn't added collisions to the shelf above him that he's supposed to be jumping onto. So I quickly just added a mesh collider to that shelf, and now he could use the bounce pad to get up onto the second level, where he would then have access to the door that leads to a secret area in the kitchen. And now it was time to add the first NPC that you would meet in the game, Pinto, the Sad Bean Man. For the purposes of this devlog, essentially anything that you can kill, I'll label as an enemy, even if it doesn't mean you any harm and is even friendly, such as Tilly. And anything that you can't inherently kill, at least at first, I'll call an NPC, such as Pinto, who I'll be creating now. Pinto was one of the first things that I ever imagined for this game, a sad little bean man with no arms, who just sits in the pantry and can do absolutely nothing to find his missing sister. So I opened up Blender and I got to work. Now, I already have a few body parts made to fit the different characters in the game that I can just kind of slap on. For instance, because of the cartoony style, almost every creature can have variations, the same type of cartoon feet. So I took a tin can that's already in the game and bent it around so it's looking down dejectedly, and added legs to it, went through the process of adding his beard and his eyes, I added materials to him, I rigged him, set up a basic animation, just a very sad, slow idle, so I imported him, and now Pinto was in the game. However, I did still have to slap the actual can texture on him, which I think did a lot to make it feel like you don't actually know whether this is meant to be a cartoon world or a more realistic world. It kind of bleeds together with characters like Pinto, who have cartoony textures such as in his beard or on his shoes, but has a realistic can texture for his body. It's meant to make you not exactly sure what's going on. Next up, I added his animations to the game and then kind of just got near him to see how he looked in the actual game, if it seemed natural. And while I was excited to make him start talking, I did want to handle making the basic pop-ups for the signs in the world first, so I got started on that. To tie in with the themes of hopelessness that the pantry has and the fact that it's a tutorial, the first sign that you see in the game gives you the tip to press Q to die, and then tells you that it might take a few hours. In reality, this is the first introduction to the fact that you can press Q to duck, which will allow you to duck under certain enemy attacks and to get into hidden areas. I thought this was a really fun way to just introduce you to the idea that that button does something. The next sign in the game welcomes you directly to the house of the sad bean man, Pinto, and it's obviously written by his sister, because Pinto doesn't have arms. And then another sign nearby, next to a broken down version of Pinto's house, is for Lima's home, which has obviously been destroyed. And she of course made the sign for herself because she does have arms. And yes, I did make a typo calling her the Sweat Bean Girl, which is very funny, but I do eventually go back and fix that as Sweet Bean Girl. The next sign is meant to introduce you to the idea of bounce pads. I'm assuming by this point your character's figured out that they can jump, but ideally this sign is what gets you to the next level. And now that that was done, I could finally add dialogue to Pinto. First off, giving you your first quest, which is to find his sister, because again, he doesn't have arms. And then, after he's given you this quest, if you go back and talk to him again before you found his sister, he'll just keep giving you this ambient dialogue of, "Oh, don't mind me, I'm just a can of beans." On that note, I originally added full dialogue for Pinto, actually voicing his lines in character. But ultimately that didn't fit really the style of the game that I was going for, and so I decided to just make his voice grumbles, which is similar to how when Tilly speaks, she'll sound like this. And yes, there will be some fully voiced dialogue in the game, but it's not for the cartoon characters in these little fantasy worlds. So now when you talk to Pinto, he'd actually make a sound, a little grumble, to signify that he was speaking to you. And that just felt so fun to me. Now that most of the basics of the pantry were set up and Pinto could talk, I decided it was time to tackle this basic loading screen because it was so boring it was driving me crazy. And the image I had in my mind was the name of the level up at the top in red, and then how many of the things you'd collected down at the bottom with the loading symbol, and then a custom image for every level in the game that I would hand draw. And then, right smack in the middle, I'd make some type of unique text that would show up when you're going into the level. So then I started setting this up with some of the levels that I'd already made in the game, like the kitchen level, and the pantry, and the fridge world. This just made it feel so much more fun to go between levels. You weren't just looking at a basic loading. You actually had something to keep you entertained, and even an update on the bottom on some of the things that you had collected. And having this template set up for levels that you go into makes this game feel so much better to me to play. And hopefully it'll make it feel better for you when you eventually get to play it. And that's what I've been doing. In last week's devlog, I mainly focused on creating Pinto, who is in the tutorial level. He's a little sad bean man. While playtesting the game, I quickly realized that I never actually added a collider to Pinto when I put him in the game, meaning essentially you could just walk right through him like he was a ghost. Ooh, that was stupid. So that was one of the first things I fixed in this devlog, so that if you're heartless enough, you can stand directly on his head as he sits there being depressed that his sister is missing. After that, I decided to go back to the fridge world level and set up the bridges that go between the two islands, which would allow you to progress further in the game. When you first enter the fridge world level, the bridge between the two islands is down, meaning you can't access the snack food kingdom, which is the one with the cemetery that's falling apart here. That also leads into the freezer level, but that's a later thing. First, I had to make it so that this bridge could be raised, and the way to do that is via the lever inside the avocado castle. So step one was just turning the lever to the off position and then creating an animation so that it could be switched over to the on position. And then of course I forgot to actually set up a way for you to trigger it. So next was making it functional using the passive interact trigger that I'd already set up previously. And so now when you walked up to this lever, you could right click to flip it on. And then when you went outside, the bridges would be raised, giving you access to an entirely new part of this level. And while this was exciting, and I couldn't wait to start adding more to that side of the level, first I had to do some housekeeping on this lever. Specifically, I just had to set the lever so that if you'd already activated it and you went back to that level, you wouldn't have the option to activate it again. And this is the type of thing that game developers have to do 1,000 times a day that you probably never would have even thought about, but when you're making the game, these are the types of things you have to keep track of. And really, that's a day in the life of any game developer, just fixing tiny little problems that nobody else would think about, but you know people are going to uncover when they're playing. Another thing indie game developers always have to deal with is making things easier for the player so that there's less slog in the game. Slog meaning having to backtrack or grind or do anything that players are not going to just typically enjoy doing. For example, in the kitchen level, the way it's set up now, once you get off of the higher levels, such as the table or the counter, and you end up on the floor, there's really no way to get back up there except for going through the pantry level and coming out of the door that leads out to the cabinet and allows you to drop down onto the counter. And so I decided that once you'd done that once, you shouldn't have to go through the pantry again to get up on the higher levels. And so my solution was to make one of the stools sitting next to the counter start just going up and down once you'd regained access to the countertop. And with that set up, there was one less thing in the game to annoy players. The final mechanical issue I wanted to try and fix before I moved on to adding things to the snack level was fixing what happened when you die, because currently when you die, this happens. And that's it. The screen goes to black and nothing happens. You actually have to exit the game and go back in to restart that level. So the way that I fixed this was making it so that now when your character dies, you'll be sent back to the loading screen. And now dying no longer meant restarting the game entirely. which meant mechanically this game was pretty playable for at least the levels that I had made so far. But now I was excited to get back to adding things to my levels. In the snack level, one of the most prominent things that you'll see is the Cemetery of Sugar. And so to fit the theming of that, I decided to make a danger that pops up from in front of some of the gravestones. Specifically, what's made to look like a bony hand made out of candy. So I went through my typical process of making things, starting with Blender, where I do all of my 3D modeling and animating and rigging, things like that. And also typically I do a lot of texturing, but I don't think I do with this skeletal hand specifically. And then I import it into Unity. And it really only has two animations, an idle, where it just kind of drums its fingers on the ground waiting for something to come by, and then an attack animation for when something gets too close. Specifically, you. So I put it in Unity and set it up so that it can deal damage to the player and so that it will start moving and trying to attack you once you get within a certain radius. And then, recycling some textures that I already had in Unity, I made it look a little more dirty and grungy and skeletal, like it really had just come up from the ground. And now this part of the level had enemies of some sort. Next up, I wanted to add a new type of collectible to the game. Currently, you already had a coin and a cookie that you could collect. However, it was time to add in the candy. So I went through my typical process of making it in Blender, and then I imported it to Unity and added some particle effects to the prefab so that it would have a little bit of a glittery, glowing effect and catch your attention. And then I added the coding that would make it actually collectible, including a global variable that would keep track of how many of these you'd collected in total. And then, because it's meant to be more of a secret collectible, I hid it behind the castle. However, there is one more element to this collectible that I feel like I should mention, and that is that this collectible is one of the only ways that you gain access to the overarching story of the game. It's how you get answers about who created you and what is actually happening in the game. So it's a very important collectible. So in fact, when you collect it, every single individual candy will have its own line of dialogue that's actually voice acted by the people who are going to be voice acting in the game, that gives you some more information about what's happening. So you can beat the entire game without collecting any of these candies, but if you really want to get the most out of this experience, you're going to want to collect every single one of these. For example, when you collect this first one behind the castle, this is what you hear upon collecting it. Look, I understand why you want me to do this, but I feel stupid. I was a kid when I made all this shit up. And yeah, it's meant to be a bit weird and catch you off guard. That's kind of the point of it. And so I added more, moved them around to different places on the map, and added new lines of dialogue for every single one. For instance, this one in the cage. I mean, no matter what you lose in a place, it's still, it's still... And there's actually a third one hidden behind this great gravestone for the King Waffle. No, I wouldn't say I was preoccupied with death. And I'm abbreviating what I'm actually playing, but there's actually full snippets of dialogue. I'm just playing bits of it for you here in the devlog. And so this is the week I actually had to get into doing real voice acting for this game. And I'm not going to be the only one. I'm going to be doing some voice acting. My girlfriend is going to be doing some. I have a few other people in mind that are going to do characters. So it is an overarching, in-depth story that's going to be told over the course of the game by you collecting these candies. If you do. Otherwise, you're just exploring a cute little world, and there's really nothing more to it than that. Enjoy. Now that I had this third collectible made, I needed to make it so that you could keep track of how many that you'd collected. And while for most levels it's not important enough to be on the actual screen constantly, like the cookie or the coin, I did want you to have a general idea of how many you had as you played through the game. And in fact, if you watched my last devlog, you might have noticed that when I made the loading screen, next to the cookie and the coin counter, there was a third collectible that just wasn't there, but the template for it was created. And that was always meant to be for this candy. So the first thing that I needed to do was create a little icon for it. And to make sure that it felt consistent with the cookie and the coin, I used the outline for those as the starting point. And for anyone wondering, I use Krita as my 2D art application. It's completely free, and I honestly think it's really easy to use, so that's what I'd recommend if you're looking. When that was finally done, I just slapped it in place on the loading screen, and now the loading screen actually was completely done. So, another thing down. Okay, enough mechanics. I was finally ready to get back to making new things for the Snack Kingdom. Specifically, it was time to start looking at the top of the cake mountain. And the first thing that I wanted to work on that's been bugging me is that these birthday cake candles don't have any flames, they're not lit, and they should be. And since in one of my past devlogs, I spent some time learning how particle systems worked, I figured I'd play around and see if I could make some estimation of fire. Honestly, it didn't have to look great in my opinion. It just had to look like a general fire effect. If it turned out cartoony or not realistic looking, that was fine. That honestly fit my game perfectly. So I started fiddling around with it, and it took some trial and error, but eventually I ended up with something that was close enough to fire to suit my needs. And I moved that around to all of the candles, and finally the birthday cake was lit. It's lit. I'm sorry. I gotta stop making dumb jokes. Now the candles were lit, but there still needed to be something on the top of this mountain, and I had a very fun idea for what it would be. So I did a quick sketch of my idea, which was for Melting Marston, who was once a great protector that guarded the entrance to the freezer where the snack citizens who had survived the attack from the Health Kingdom were now hiding out. However, because he was so close to all of these burning candles, he had melted down into just a blob of marshmallow agony. So I took that sketch and began making it in Blender. You've seen this process, modeling, texturing, all that jazz. And then I imported him into Unity and popped him on top of the mountain. I made the decision to animate him in Unity because it's just a really simple up and down when you bounce off of his head. Which leads me to my next point. When you get on top of him, you're supposed to be able to bounce on his head up into the entrance to the freezer level. After effectively turning him into a bounce pad, the next thing was to give him a dialogue box so that he could talk to you. And that was fun to set up. However, when I tried it, I realized that the zoom in camera that's supposed to focus in on who you're talking to didn't really make a lot of sense with how big this character was. First, I tried just kind of zooming it back a little bit. However, of course, it lined up exactly with something in the way. So I tried again, even zooming it back further and higher up to get a full view of the scene, and I felt like that was perfect. And now, Melting Marston was completely set up, and ideally you should be able to get into the freezer level. However, between the freezer level and this level, I intend to make a transition level with a kind of fun little platformer area that you have to climb through to get to the actual freezer. And this will pretty much be the first time you've seen me build an entire level from scratch, so make sure you tune in next time to see that. Also, some people have been asking about it. So going into this devlog, there were two things that I wanted to get done. First, I wanted to take the idea that I had for this transition level from this sketch to this. I also wanted to set up an enemy type that makes combat more fun. Essentially, I wanted to make something that's fun to kill. So the first thing I did was start making the transition level from scratch. And a lot of people have asked me where you even start with making a level. Well, you start with the basic concept. So this idea was for a transition level that goes between the fridge world, which you've seen, and the freezer level, which will come next. So that's the basic concept. From there, you also got to figure out what purpose it's supposed to serve in terms of mechanics. What do you do? What's the point of it? And this transition level is meant to make you feel like you're actually climbing up to a freezer, but more importantly, it's also supposed to get you a lot more comfortable with the platforming, specifically how your character moves, things like that. So in order to do that, I put a heavy emphasis on platforms. Platforms. Makes sense. And the platforms themselves are meant to be cute, fun things that have to do with food. So I made a quick sketch of the basic layout of the level, including little diagrams of the types of things that'll need to be made for the level. And then I started making it, which is a whole bunch of steps, so we'll stop with the counting. So the very first thing I did was create a new scene and add a skybox to it. This is the most basic thing that you do. And from there, I knew I wanted it to have a pink feel, so I started playing around with the colors of the skybox that I had put in. And while I had a very clear idea of wanting it to be pink, I eventually realized that what I have available right now wasn't going to work, so I just kind of popped it back to a normal skybox and moved on from there. Next, I took the prefabs that I had made for the character and some of the other things in the game, and I just kind of slapped that into the scene. So you do have a player character that works, it's just he literally has nothing to interact with. And in fact, if you pressed play, he would just fall forever. So now I had to look at my sketch and start using that as a basis to make things in the level. So as you can kind of make out, the first thing that you start on is a basic plate. So I just opened up Blender and got to work on making that. Really simple, I've made several before. Then I popped it in Unity, made sure you could run around on it, and then, because it looked really basic, I needed to mess with the materials to make sure that it would look nice and shiny and reflective, which just makes the whole scene look a lot better. And this is probably a good time to look at my Discord, because I actually live streamed myself making the next part of the level, which is just a couple of graham crackers and putting them in Unity and making them move. So I showed the process of that there. So I'll link my Discord below, it's a great community, you should definitely join it. You'll get to see exclusive stuff, and you'll get to talk to me anytime you want. Show me your art, you know, it's a fun place to be. Anyways, I did that there, so the graham crackers are in. From there, I had to make a lot more stuff. I made the macaroons, the cinnamon rolls, and the donuts with the suckers sticking out of them, which was pretty complicated because the actual heads of the suckers needed to turn separately from the donuts, so that you would always be able to stand on them. They always needed to be essentially flat side up. Next, I did a live stream for this YouTube channel, actually, that you can just go and watch now if you're interested. In that live stream for YouTube, I added some of the macaroons to the level, and I made an entire plate of pancakes with syrup on it, and even a spat of butter on top that you're meant to be able to jump on. When I added the macaroons in the live stream, I originally had them set up where you kind of just land on them and you can move around on them like typical platforms, and then I had them moved to give you a little bit of difficulty getting on them. However, ultimately playing it, I decided I didn't quite like how that feels. So then I had the idea of making them bounce pads, so that you can just keep a lot of momentum when you're going through the first part of this level. And that automatically felt a lot more fun. However, when I first set it up, I did have the bounce height set really high, so when you first jumped on it, it would shoot you up pretty much basically to the plate already. So there was barely any platform needed, so I had to lower the bounce height down quite a bit to just make it a little bounce to the next one, instead of sending you flying off into space. I'd also eventually move them into the shape of a staircase, but that is more than enough about macaroons. Let's talk about adding the donut to the scene. So I imported the mesh and the textures and the animations and slapped it into the scene, and then I began resizing it so that it would actually be big enough to serve as a spinning platform to raise you up to another level. And then I pressed play, and it was gone. And I looked around for a little bit, and it was, for some reason, all the way down here. And I wasn't sure why.
Donuts.
So essentially I realized if I took the animation out of the prefab, I could just edit it to completely remove the location, which was what was teleporting it to the other side of the map. With that gone, it was now in place. However, I still had another problem to solve because the heads of the lollipop were also supposed to have animation attached to them. And this took a lot of fiddling, and it also made me realize that I have almost no experience with multiple objects that are part of the same prefab that have different animations. If it's all part of the same prefab, Unity does not want to play separate animations for it. And after getting very frustrated, I briefly toyed with the idea of just making the sucker head one of the round ones that would be easier for you to just kind of jump on. But I took a deep breath, I did some research, I looked into things, and I eventually realized the way to fix this was that I needed to create custom animations in Unity for the heads of the lollipop. And I had to make this animation inside the animation for the donut itself. And that solved my problem. Now the donut was working exactly how I wanted it to. And it was only a little bit of a massive headache to figure out. But that's game dev, baby. That was stupid. At this point, my girlfriend looked at the things I'd been doing and decided that she wanted to help. She wanted me to guide her through making something in Blender, which was super fun. She wanted to make the cinnamon roll, but I'd already made that, so she decided to help me make my little marshmallow friend, who she named Kevin. And Kevin is meant to be the first NPC that you'll talk to in this transition level we've been making. He'll be the one that'll maybe inform you for the first time that you can even double jump, so he's kind of important. So now he was made, but I wanted to get back to actually making the level, and I definitely did not forget to put him in later. I 100% did that. I didn't put him in. So the next thing I added in was the cinnamon rolls. I gave them each a really simple little animation that they could go through, and made them larger platforms that you can walk across. And then tried it out, and it was everything I wanted it to be. No problems with this one. You'd almost think I'm getting the hang of this game dev thing. Oh, that's funny. Anyway, I would make the cinnamon roll bottoms less reflective later. Then I took the stack of pancakes and put them on a plate and put coins around it, and then I made the butter pads actually make you bounce into the air. I used some of the pieces that I had before to extend the level out, which was always the plan, and then I added in the chocolate bars, which I don't have a fancy clip of me editing in Blender. You get the idea. We're really zipping along now. What's up next? A cup of hot cocoa. And the idea of this is that it's really large and you have to jump from marshmallow to marshmallow that's moving back and forth in the cup to get across. And if you follow the hot cocoa, obviously you die painfully. So I put it in place, and then, using what I learned earlier from the donut and the lollipops, I made a combined animation to make the marshmallows move back and forth. And now you had a dangerous cup of hot cocoa that you could bounce across. I really hope those aren't little dead Kevins in there. Oh god. So I continued making more from what I already had, and I want to give a special shout out to my Discord buddy, Custom Chris, who watched my live streams and, inspired by the chocolate bars he saw me making that, decided to just send me a blend file for a chocolate bar that he had made. and told me I could put it in the game, so here it is, in the game. So thank you, Custom Chris. Just another reminder to comment, join the Discord. I really love this community, and I really value your opinion. I love that I got the opportunity to put something like this in my game, because of talented people like you who care about it. So now this small level was pretty much done. I put a cinnamon roll on the final plate before you go to the freezer, and now I just had to create the entrance to the freezer. And to do that, I had to import the freezer file into this game so that I could take the pipe from that and put it right here. I originally planned for it to just be kind of sticking up out of the cinnamon roll, but I didn't like how that looked, so I tried pushing it down where it's like icing to snow. Didn't like how that looked either, so eventually I just gave up and slapped it on the plate. So now you had an exit to the level, which led directly to the freezer. And while I wasn't really planning to do anything with the freezer right now, I did want to just quick slap some fog on there to give it a more ominous, creepy vibe. At this point, I was happy enough with the level to move on to something a little more exciting. Murder! Specifically creating an enemy that's a little more fun to kill. So meet Carter, who's going to be in the healthy kingdom. He's a carton of milk with a big straw, and he tries to hit you. So I just start by animating him in Blender, giving him the few basic animations that you'd expect: a hit, an idle, an attack, a walk, and a death. And then I just threw him into Unity to get started. I was ready to go. I gave him his textures, and then I slapped on a rigid body and a capsule collider so that now he could be used as an enemy and slapped around effectively. I just quickly applied his idle animation and then jumped into the game to see how all of this was working without any coding yet. And he was doing something. It was weird as hell. So I fiddled around and realized what I did wrong, and now he was standing up straight. But good God, he was still deformed something crazy. It was a scaling issue, which I managed to fix, and finally, my boy Carter was standing and ready to fight. Except all he could do was his idle animation, because that's all I'd put in so far. This enemy did not need anything complex like a nav mesh, so I started real simple and just made it so that there's a large sphere around him that is triggered when the player enters and makes him follow you, and he faces you as well. However, immediately I ran into problems where once he got close to you or you attacked him, he would just stop moving. I fixed that and then set up a health system for him and allowed him to both attack, be attacked, and die when he takes enough damage. And originally I planned for him to be a 2-hit enemy, where you have to hit him twice, at least from the start, with the amount of damage that you do, to kill him. And obviously there were some glitches with that, but it was a start. I sped up some of the animations and decided to make it so that he dies in one hit to make it just really satisfying to hit him real good and watch him die. However, I didn't fix the FSM so that now when you hit him, he would play the hit animation first before he played the death animation. And it kind of looked like it just took a second for him to realize that he had been killed. So that was a pretty quick fix, and now he could be killed in one hit. However, I didn't disable his movement or his attack when he died, so he would just pop back up and keep attacking until he disappeared, because that's what his health FSM programmed him to do 5 seconds after he was killed. And thankfully that was also a quick fix. And yeah, he was dead, you had killed him, but somehow it just didn't feel like you had really beaten his brains out, which is what I was going for. And so obviously, when you bash someone with a candy cane, blood should come out. So I popped a particle effect on so that now anytime that he was hit, blood would pop out. And that felt satisfying. However, Carter was never meant to be a singular enemy, that's why it was a one-hit kill. He was supposed to attack you in swarms. So I spread a bunch of them out and popped into the game to see what it would be like to fight them in groups. However, when I attacked the first one, something happened that blew my frickin' mind. And for a second, I had no idea why this was happening. But continuously, if you were even near them and you swung your attack, you would just kill anyone that was near. And after some trial and error, I eventually realized that this had to do with the detection trigger that he uses to find you and attack you. Because that was a child of the parent object that was tagged as an enemy, when it came into contact with your attack, would trigger and deal damage, thus killing him. So pretty much, if he could see you and you attacked, you would kill him. Pretty broken, not gonna lie. I mean, it looks cool as heck, but it's broken. So I had to fix it. Unfortunately, that meant I had to make a lot of changes to the way this entire thing was set up. I had to take the big sphere collider that lets him know where the player is and track and follow and attack him, and I had to move that so that it's no longer a child of him. And so to do this, I made a different parent object and made both Carter and the detector sphere children of that separately. However, I kept most of the FSM on Carter instead of this overarching parent, and I thought that would work fine, so I hopped into the game, and I don't know why I honestly expected that to work. I realized that this was happening because the parent object that I'd created to hold both of these parts that make up Carter had a different origin point than either of them. And so when it would move in relation to the new parent object's origin that I'd created, which was nowhere near Toby. So I just synced all that up to the same position, and it was now working pretty much perfectly. At least I thought. However, when I got into the game, I realized that the detector I'd put around him so that he could follow you did not move with him anymore. So his detection range was always in one place, and you could just move in and out of that, and he would stop following you. And at first I thought that was an issue and I was going to have to restart this entire thing, but then I realized that for other enemies this might not work, but for Carter this was fine. He was literally just guarding this little area, and that was kind of his purpose always. So by leaving it like this, it kind of just felt like when you left the area that he was guarding, he became non-hostile to you. It's not a bug, it's a feature. So this setup would work fine. However, while testing this out, I discovered that he had magical powers to walk on air. And believe it or not, I had not intended him to be an airbender. I just forgot to move his rigid body and give him gravity.
So he was no longer tethered to the laws of man.
Thankfully, that was another quick fix. So I did a little more fine-tuning and extended his detector range so that it was pretty much everywhere around the castle. So if you're anywhere on that island, he'll try and get you. But if you leave, he's like, alright, we cool. And now I was pretty sure I had him finally set up exactly how I wanted. So I copied him all over the place again and tried one more time to see how it was when he attacked in a group. And it was so much fun beating these things to death. Have I mentioned this as a horror game in a while? So now I had enemies that were actually a little challenging and really fun to fight and kill. I mean, I'm still a new indie game developer, and seeing something like this come to life and playing it is so incredibly exciting for me. So now that I had him done, it was time to pop him into a prefab and see if he would work in the transition level that I'd been making. So I put him up on that second plate that you're able to jump up to, and I ran up to challenge him. And he... Hello my baby, hello my darling, hello my ragtime gal. Okay. So he did that. I quickly realized that the way that the prefab was made, it wasn't able to track the player as the object he's supposed to be following, so I had to manually input that into the prefab, and now I could put this enemy all over the level. And jumping through this level that I'd just made and fighting an enemy that I had just created from scratch was honestly so exciting for me. And I was almost done, but there was just a couple more things I wanted to do. So first, there's this cup of hot cocoa here that you're supposed to jump through, and you bounce off the marshmallows to get to the other side. However, to really give the feel that this was hot cocoa, I wanted steam to be coming up off of it, which would also make the platforming across the marshmallows there just a little more difficult, as your vision was a little impaired. Perfect. The final thing I did was actually at the prompting of my girlfriend. If you'll remember, at the very beginning of this devlog, I said that I wanted this entire transition level to have a pink skybox. However, by the time I had finished the entire level, I had gotten so used to the normal blue skybox that I had just accepted that's what it's going to be. And my girlfriend prompted me that I should go with my original vision and find a skybox that fit my original vision. And I went to the Unity store and I actually found one for free. And for those wondering, I do make all of my own assets except for my skyboxes. So I put that in and it was perfect. It was exactly what I wanted. And that just kind of served as a reminder to me to keep your vision for what you want to make in mind, and try not to settle for anything less just because you got comfortable with the easy alternative. Now obviously there's a lot of gray area here and you need to get your game done more than anything else, but when you can, remember not to lose what you originally wanted for your game, because your vision is everything as a solo indie game developer. And that's what I've been working on the last few weeks. Make sure to like and subscribe for more content like this. So I started out by fixing this tube that goes between this transition level and the freezer level. A lot of people said it kind of looked out of place on the plate, and one person in particular in my Discord named Lizzo? I'm sorry. Anyways, Lizzo said maybe the ice hole thingy that takes you to the freezer level could be surrounded by popsicles to make it look a little more in place. And I loved that idea. So I added in some ice and some of the popsicle characters from the next level, and then I started putting things inside of the ice cubes, coins, Carter, cookies, a lot of sea things, I guess. Anyways, after that, I put in some nice fog, as if kind of like when you open a freezer and it's, you know, just misting off of it. And I thought all that looked pretty good. So thank you, Lizzo, for your suggestion. Next up, it was time to add a new enemy to the game, Barry. I'd already previously made the model, so I just had to rig him and then animate him. A lot of his animations were pretty similar to Carter, except for his death animation, I wanted to have a separate one that was basically just him being squished. Because Carter is too bulky to be crushed, but a cute little strawberry on legs, if you stomp on his head, should be able to be murdered that way. So now you could squish him. Next up, I threw him in Unity and added the sprites that are going to be his eyes and the greenery leaves. What do you call those on top of strawberries? I'm going to call them leaves. The leaves that are on top of his head. And I fiddled around with that for a second, and I decided I didn't really like how his legs turned out, so I had an idea to fix those. I just kind of made a little bit of the grass texture sticking up out of the tinfoil that make up his boots, and I thought that looked good. And Barry is one of the characters in the game that's meant to be a mix of realistic textures like the strawberry and the tinfoil and 2D cartoony sprites like his eyes and the top of his head. And I personally love how this ended up looking, but let me know in the comments what you think about it. What do you think? Smash or pass? So first I started by adding a collider to Barry, and then a very, very large collider that goes around him. That's kind of his detection sphere. And that's used so that if you're within that range, he will turn towards you and chase you down to attack you. With that set up, I hopped into the game, and first thing, obviously a couple of these Carters are acting pretty weird, but I wasn't within the sphere where Barry would notice me yet, so I was going to take care of the Carters and then worry about him. And then when I went to go and see if he was working, I realized what the problem is. I hadn't set the detection sphere collider around him to be a trigger only, so essentially it was treating that as if there was actually something there for you to hit. So I just had to click that, and now he was working. At least as far as this, so far. So now he could follow you. I did not still set up the rigid body, so he was kind of flying through the air. Just like Carter last time, he was
No longer tethered to the earth of you mortals.
so dorky. So I clicked a few more things and set that up. Now he had gravity. I also gave him my health systems that he could deal damage and die. Before I worked anymore on Barry, I wanted to make it so that when you killed something, you understood why you're incentivized to do that. Specifically, you're given coins. So I wanted to give more active feedback to the player that killing an enemy rewards them with coins. So I started by taking the coin sprite and adding that to a particle effect that would play after they collect the coins after killing a character. And then I also added the coin collect sound effect to that. And now, after an enemy took their final breath, you were given 3 coins. Get that money! And while I'm talking about coins, I hear you, the coins are repetitive. Trust me, I pick them up 100 times a day. I get it. I'd been putting it off because I wasn't sure exactly how I wanted to do it, and I knew there were several ways to do this, but I started simple and just tried making the pitch randomized every time you collected a coin. And it felt weird. So what I did was make it so that when you collect a coin, the pitch of the coin sound effect would be raised slightly every time, unless it's been 5 seconds since the last time you collected a coin, and then the combo that you've been building ends, and the pitch resets. This is meant to make it feel more fun to collect coins quickly, and this quickly raising pitch is something that a lot of games do to get you to do this. So I tried it out, and okay, so I had a global variable set at 0 that would raise every time you collected a coin. That's how the pitch was supposed to raise. However, I set the pitch to start at 0 instead of 1. And 0 is effectively -1 for all intents and purposes. It's really low. And the pitch was also raising too fast, so I had to lower the amount that was raised each time you collected a coin. Now it feels somewhat functional. Next, I made this also apply to when you get the sound effect after you kill an enemy. Just some more subconscious motivation to go on a killing spree whenever you get the opportunity. Anyways, back to Barry. So, one thing that makes Barry different than Carter is that Barry's detection trigger actually moves with him, meaning he can follow you and follow you and follow you no matter how far away you go, versus Carter, who's essentially only guarding a specific area, and if you leave that area, he leaves you alone. Next, I set up Barry's walk animation, and oh my god, it was so cute watching him chase you around. Look at his little feet's just moving. And I also set up his death animation. And that's your warning. Don't get too attached to things in my game. You might end up killing them. Another thing that makes Barry different than Carter is that Barry actually talks to you sometimes. So to show this, I gave them a dialogue box and just set them up as little cockney guards in front of the bridges that lead over to the other side of the Healthy Kingdom.
Hello, you're not supposed to be here. Let's not cross this bridge if you know what's good for you.
Also, the little dialogue image that I drew for them is my favorite so far. However, in order to set this up correctly, I had to create a global variable, basically a state, that shows whether or not you are hostile to the characters in the Healthy Kingdom. So essentially, Barry will just talk to you and talk to you and talk to you using the dialogue box that I set up until you go over to the other side of the kingdom and enter that trigger space or kill an enemy, and then the game will let the guard berries know that you are now hostile to them, and they will start attacking you. So essentially with Carter, you're always going to have beef on sight, but with Barry, it's determined by whether or not you have pissed him off yet. You might have also noticed that I added something extra to this scene. I was looking back over at my concept art and realized that in my original ideas, I had so much barbed wire in this area. So I just popped into Krita and made that quick based on the concept sketch, and threw it around and made it so that it did damage to you if you collided with it. And now this felt a lot more like a place you go to die. Now that Barry was set up and I'd spent a lot of time on this fridge world area, I wanted to do something that was a little more general. Specifically, from the beginning of this process, I had in my mind an idea for a box that you could break and either get coins or health pickups. This is kind of a staple of the 3D platformer genre, and so I finally decided to put in the time to make that. So, first and foremost, I had to give you a way to break the box, and I really wanted this to be a satisfying thing for you to do. I made an animation that would play after you hit it, and then I sped that up because it was too slow, and then to just kind of cheat for the moment, I hid a health pickup inside the box. No coding, it's just slapped in there. Next, to make it feel more satisfying, I made it so that when you hit it, a particle effect would play. This would also make it feel more like you actually broke something, and that was a good start. I didn't like how this health pickup just kind of lingered in the air after you broke a box. I felt like it should drop to the ground, so in order to do that, I needed to set up a rigid body, so that it would have gravity attached to it. I also finally put coding on it so it would actually wait to spawn until you had broken the box. I hopped into the game to try it out, and just like everything else, of course, it didn't work right the first time, but at least it was kind of funny looking. You could essentially just roll it around because I didn't lock the upwards rotation in place, which is what you should do with things like coins. So you can move them around with the rigid body, but it'll still face the right way and spin the right way. So that was a pretty quick fix. So next, to get a satisfying sound of breaking the box, I went into my kitchen and I grabbed some leftover chips from Chili's, and I held my microphone next to one as I crushed it into a trash can, and I threw that sound effect into the game. And while I loved it, I thought I should try reducing the pitch a little bit to make it a more boxy sound. And that wasn't the best call. But I put it back to normal, and now you had a satisfying sound for when you broke the boxes. It really felt good. Next, I wanted to make it so that if the box was in the air, you could jump from underneath and hit it, and it'll pop and explode, kind of like the Mario blocks. So I set that up, and that worked pretty well, except it's pretty hard to gauge whether or not you're under it in the right space, but, I mean, even Super Mario 64 struggled with that, so good enough. Next, I remade the box, and instead of the health pickup, I put a coin in there that would pop out when you hit it. And that was fine, but I thought it'd be more fun to have 3 coins pop out instead. And I thought that felt and looked a lot cooler. And now I had boxes set up. I could sprinkle them around, put them around the world. I just had another thing for you to interact with. And that was fun. And it was satisfying, so I was happy. Let me know what you think about the boxes. And Chili's. I went to Chili's for the first time, and it was really good, so I'm glad I got to use the chips in the game, I guess. I'm not sponsored by Chili, obviously, but now I'm hungry. What am I doing? I'm making a devlog. Anyways, so next I slapped a few of these boxes in the transition level, and I loved how that ended up looking. So now I didn't have any more excuses to prevent me from starting the freezer level. And I always avoid starting new levels because it's so much stress hopping into something completely bare bones and trying to make it into a full world for you to explore. Like, where do you even start with that? Well, for this one, I decided to start by reformatting an old enemy. So I took Carter and I added a icy freezer burn material to him. And I also slowed down his movement quite a bit. Next, I put smaller ones around the world, but I mainly focused on making the one in the middle here larger. And even though he was bigger, he was more brittle, so he was still killed with one hit. So not quite a mini-boss, but still a little more intimidating than your average enemy. One thing I definitely needed to change though was that Carter is made of like ice and crystal, so when you hit him, blood shouldn't probably come out. I wanted it to feel like you were breaking ice. So I made a particle effect that felt a little more natural to that, and I would have to come back to the sound at a later point. I didn't mess with that over the course of this devlog. I guess I gotta go back to Chili's and get some ice or something. Also, I know there's some lag in these video clips. I didn't set up occlusion culling right away to make the game run smoother, and also just the process of recording in high quality also slows down things, so the actual game when you're playing it runs smoothly, and I'm sorry it doesn't always look like that here. I know that's kind of hard to watch, but I try to limit that as much as possible. In this level you'll encounter a roadblock to stop you from moving forward, and that's that there is a lever that needs to be activated to raise a bridge. However, in order to do that, you have to find the handle for the lever. So you've got the base of the lever here that you've seen before, and you have to explore and go to the other side of the level to find the lever itself. And then you go back and you can put it in place and activate it. So I set up this basic lock and key system, and then I had to actually make it functional. So I made it so that you could collect the handle out of the ground and it would play the ice particle effect when you did that, like you're just jerking it up out of the ice. And then I also added a particle effect for when the bridge pops into existence, to give it the effect that it's been raised out of the ice and snow below it. And that definitely felt and looked a lot better, but it was missing a couple things. First of all, I needed to make the camera shake when this happened. And I had never really messed with the camera shake effect at all, so I just started fiddling around with that, and then set up a special camera effect for when this happens. And I thought that added a lot. Next up, to really bring it home, I needed a deep, rattling earth shake effect, as if it's just being really ripped up out of the earth below it when you pull the switch. And with all these pieces together, it felt so good and so almost polished to activate this switch and see this bridge raised. My girlfriend said it kind of reminded her of in Breath of the Wild when you raise the shrines up, and I think that's a pretty flattering comparison. Let me know what you think. So now it was time to talk about him. This was the only popsicle creature in this world, and I'm calling them poppers, that will interact with you. So I slapped a basic template on him for his dialogue box, and it was clear I was going to have a lot of work to do, so I zoomed the camera out and gave him a dialogue image and gave you a choice about what you do in this situation. So you can either drop a coin or you can dishonor him. And what does that mean? Well, I wanted to institute a curse that he puts on you if you dishonor him. So in order to set that up, I made it so that when you are cursed and that effect is taking place, your coins will slowly start reducing every 3 seconds. And then to really make sure you felt like you were cursed, I also added a sound effect, which was a reversed version of the coin pickup sound effect, and then made some custom UI to slap on the screen, kind of to obscure your vision and make you immediately understand that something is very, very wrong. So next I made it so that if you talk to him and give him a coin, or even if you're out of coins, if you try to give him a coin, the curse will be lifted. And finally, I just had to make it so that if you give him a coin and you honor him, he'll flip the second switch for you and raise the second bridge. And you would finally have access to the... Oh, wouldn't you like to know? You'll have to find out in the next devlog, because that's as far as I went. I will tell you there'll be a lot more... I also started working on the freezer level. Now, a big problem that I noticed when I started trying to record the freezer level was that there was a lot of lag. It was hard to look at, to say the least. And it didn't take me long to realize that's because I never set up occlusion culling. So essentially, without this, everything in the entire scene was trying to load at once, even though it wasn't on the camera. And especially given the fact that this level has a lot of fog, I could set the clipping distance really close, because you won't be able to see past a certain point anyways. And when I was setting up the occlusion culling, I used a new camera to kind of just see how it would work, and then when I started playing to test it out, this is what was still set. So here's me running around with a weird, stupid camera for a few seconds. Anyways, so I set that up, and now the game was running pretty smooth. And since I now made it so that the freezer was running smoothly, I decided to go back and set up the fridge world the same way. Since I was here, I figured I might as well go ahead and grab the fire that was on top of the candles on this cake mountain and save them as a prefab so that I could just pop them into the freezer. Cool, but this fire needed to be more than just a basic particle system because you were close enough to interact with it. So I started by adding a light around it so it gives off red ambient light. That felt nice. I added this light to the prefab, and anything I do from the fire from this point on would all be added to the prefab, so that it affects all the campfires going forward. Speaking of which, there were other campfires that needed to be lit. It's lit. I gotta stop making that joke every time I do a fire thing. Anyways, yeah, more campfires. But fire isn't silent. Fire makes a sound, like a crackling sound, yeah, that sound. So I added that to the prefab for the campfires, and now it felt a lot more like you were near fire. However, since you're playing a mortal being, fire should hurt them. And with a quick few fixes, now it could. So yay, fire done. I'm just like the indie game equivalent of a caveman. Ooh, ooga booga, fire. I'm sorry. Anyways, next up. So in the freezer level, you see these popsicle looking things around. I call these poppers, and a couple people have mentioned a way to make this a little more ominous, which I love. Specifically, Sticky the Stick from my Discord. You flex on your friends, my friend. Quick reminder to join my Discord, link in the description. And from my YouTube comments, Stoic FX. And both of these suggestions basically boil down to having the poppers follow you as you move through the level, kind of watching you with their big creepy eye. So I tried that out with just a basic smooth look at action, but that was too comfortable for me. So I had a better idea. Creepy. You never see them move, but they're always looking at you. Fun. What's next? Music and ambient sound effects. And to be clear, I've made everything else in this game minus the skyboxes and this music. The music for this game is made by a man named Gabriel Calderon, who's incredibly talented and generously offered to make the music for this game. Comment down below to let him know how much of a G he is. A G? What is this, 2003? Oh, I'm sorry. My jokes are so bad. Anyways, he rocks, and here's the music. It's killer. It's perfect. I added some wind sound effects, an ambient hum of a freezer, and I also made it so that when you go into a cave, the wind sound effects die down and there's a dripping sound. All in all, I loved the feeling this gave the game. Thank you again, Gabriel. You seriously rock. Next up, I added the berry enemy to this game and also gave him a frostbite variant. Just like Carter, if you watched the last devlog, he's an undead, frostbitten version of what he is in the fridge world. Creepy. Now that I had a new enemy to kill, I wanted to add a nice ice-breaking sound effect for when you hit them, to give you the feeling that you're breaking ice. Good. Rad. Feels nice. Next up, in my Discord, link in the description, Hector suggested that I put in a snow particle effect. And while I didn't want it to feel like it was really snowing, I did like the idea of having just little particles hanging in the air around you, which kind of plays into the whimsical, frozen feeling. So I set that up, real subtle, but if you look, you can now see the particle effect. And game design is so much about atmosphere. Don't forget to look at the little details of what you can do to make your game just subtly feel and look better. I'm always looking for things like that, so if you have any ideas, feel free to comment down below or join the Discord and give me ideas there. Obviously, I listen to them. And thank you, Hector, for your suggestion. Next up, I have this whole little refugee camp for these snack foods hidden up here in the freezer that currently has nothing but tents and campfires. So I've got to make the cute little creatures that you've been sent up here to deal with. So first up was Doug, inspired by a donut, obviously. And given the fact that he's a bunch of cylinders with legs and an eye in the middle, it wasn't too complex to model. Literally pretty much the first tutorial for Blender that anyone does. However, the eye was something special because I hand drew that within Blender, which if you've ever drawn in Blender, you know it's not always the easiest thing to do. And with that done, I just slapped it into Unity, and there was Doug. I mean, he couldn't do anything, but he was there. So next up was giving him life. And then giving him death. After all, death is an important part of life. I made some different versions of him, which each needed their own UI image. worth it, and then I moved on to Kay, who was inspired by cake.
Pretty obvious.
I popped her in Unity, gave her some death animations, and made different variant versions of her as well. So now you have a full village full of NPCs for you to interact with or murder. So what's last?
Consequences.
I mean, what's the point of being able to kill a village of people if it doesn't mean anything? If you come back and they're still here, have you really killed anything? So I said it's that if you kill these NPCs and you come back, not only are they gone, but their campfires are gone too. You have decimated the few survivors that were left alive. I'm sure you'll get a cookie for it. Anyways, that's it for this. From here, I decided to start by working on something small, which is that since I'd been learning more about how the camera systems worked, I wanted to make it so that when you talked or interacted with certain things, the camera would switch to big, impressive angles. So for instance, when you walk up to the statue, instead of just focusing in on the plaque right in front of you that you're reading, I had it zoom out so that you could get a big view of the entire scene. Really feel the magnificence of this big statue. And the narcissist that made it. So from here, hi. Hi. Who are you? What are you, how did you get, what are you doing here? I'm the feature creep. No. This joke is too dumb. Anyways, yeah, so feature creep came in and I, Don't interrupt me. Get out of here. I ended up making trophies to add to the game. You find them, you collect them as you explore the game, and later, in a secret location, you'll have a place to display them. I'm super excited about what the trophies will unlock, but I'll come back to that after I've made that in a future devlog. The next little thing I did was add smoke to these cannons here in the fridge world. Super simple, but as I always say, details add a lot. So next up I added a sound effect for when you're bouncing, and that got repetitive very quickly. So I just added a pitch randomizer, and that worked horribly. The range for what the pitch could be was way too across the board, so I reined that in, and now you had a nice bounce sound effect. Good enough. What's next? I added the music that was going to go in the kitchen, and the pantry, which is just kind of an altered version of the kitchen music, and then to the fridge world. Again, all of this music is made by Gabriel Calderon. He's incredibly talented, and the music is one of the few things I'm not hand-making for this game. I am not musically gifted. So thank you, Gabriel. After that, I turned my sights to my good little pal, Kevin, and started by giving him an idle animation, and then tried to set up a rigid body. Emphasis on try. Then I wanted to make it so that if you hit him or bounce on his head, he'll play a little animation and bounce you up into the air. After all, he's a marshmallow. He's bouncy. Good. Now I had another little friend in the game, and I know how much you love guys. What? What am I saying? I know how much you guys love my little friends, and he is the cutest little friend. From here, I needed to make the loading screen that goes into the freezer. Right now it looks like this. Not ideal, so I fixed it to look like this. Perfect. And at this point, I couldn't find an excuse to put it off any longer, so I finally had to start creating the flying enemy that I'd been imagining. My girlfriend and I kind of worked together to design kind of what it should look like. She drew this sketch, and then I redesigned it to fit the style of the game, and then I started making it. I call this little guy Scoops. I went through the typical process you've seen me go through again and again and again, Blender, using the sketch that I made as a basis to model around, animation, texturing, and then importing it into Unity. I even made the ice cream material separate from the other texture so that you could change the flavor, which I thought would just be a fun way to add variety to this enemy, and would help with the fact that Scoops was intended to be the first boss. But we'll come back to that later, because I got scared of working on this and decided to do other stuff instead. Gotta keep this channel family friendly so YouTube doesn't hate me. Anyways, here's the stuff I did instead of working on this enemy. First up, I needed to fix the horrible voice acting that I had done for Tilly. She is way too cute to sound like this. Right? So I had my girlfriend record audio, and now Tilly sounds like this. And she makes this sound when you hit her. And she makes this sound when she dies. Oh my god, it breaks my heart. Oh, it hurts. Next up, so I knew from the beginning that when you start the game, I wanted it to just kind of throw you into things, and you had to figure everything out as you went. However, currently, if you pressed play and started the game right from the beginning, this is what happens. You're just kind of standing there on a cookie sheet. So I wanted to fix that. I wanted to make it so that the first time you enter this level, you're laying face down on the cookie sheet, as if you've just been made. And before that, I also wanted to set up some type of cutscene. So this is what it ended up being. Not perfect, but it feels a lot better than this. Just kind of starting. Good, what's next? Fine, guess I got nothing else. Scoops. Let's get him working in Unity, baby! I put him in the freezer level and gave him a capsule collider as well as a rigid body and... Okay, let's try taking off gravity. He's a flying creature. Okay, still not great, but when I start adding his AI, none of this is really going to matter anyways. He'll be self-propelled. You might have noticed Toby take a little damage there. I also added, right at the end of his tail, his stinger, a little collider that deals damage to you. That's the only part of him that will hurt you. And I would need to put a lot more work into this. But before that, let's make his wings flap so that it actually looks like he's flying. Ooh, nice. But, not perfect. So I guess it was time to start working on his AI, so we'd stop doing stuff like this. Okay, this gets very complex, but I'm going to try to explain it as best I can. So first, when you get close enough to him, he'll come towards you. And then, when he gets over top of you, he'll lunge down towards you to try and stab you with his stinger. Okay, good, but he couldn't just stay frozen like that. I needed to give him a state for 1, if he collided with you, and 2, for if he didn't. Okay, 1, if he hits you, he should stab you and then go back away from you for a second, before coming in for a second attack. Nope, nope. Not like that. Second try. Okay, good, that's working a lot better. Now for step 2, what if he misses you? Well, he can't miss you if he moves at the speed of light. Currently he's not telegraphing that he's going to dive down towards you, it happens too fast. So I've got to put a delay there so you can anticipate that he's going to attack you. And get out of the way. Okay, good, he pauses, but he can't just pause in place. I needed to give him something to do to signal that he's about to attack. So I gave him a cute little flip. Now you know when he's about to attack you. And you can get out of the way. Which leads me to part 2. What happens if he misses? We've already seen it, he gets stuck in the ground. Then after a few seconds he frees himself, flies up, and then comes back to attack you again. Okay, looking good. Now I needed to make it so that you could kill him. And I set it so that you could only do this when he's stuck in the ground. It's the only time he's vulnerable. Good. Already he was a lot more complex than some of the other creatures that I'd set up so far. And honestly, he was pretty fun to kill. Now that he was functional, I went ahead and added some other flavors to the game. And I'll show off chocolate and strawberry here, but there may be a few other flavors that you might have to look around to find. I am so excited for you to play this game. Anyways, cool, so I had some small ones made, but now, as I promised, it was time to make Scoops a boss. And of course, because I'm an idiot, I thought, oh, I'll just start by throwing a big one in there. Nope. No, it did not work. But it was a starting point. Okay, so a lot there to fix. First, he needed to be higher in the air before he came down at you. He also needed to move a little faster so he'd be more intimidating. And finally, I also wanted to make it so that you couldn't just hit him anywhere when he was stuck to kill him. I wanted to make it so you could only kill him by hitting the weak spot, the cherry on the back of his head, or by stomping on it. Classic platforming move. However, he wasn't meant to be a one-hit kill. Because he was a boss, it would take 3 hits to kill him, and each hit would have a different effect on him, specifically changing his flavor. However, this meant that his FSM now looked like this. So this Scoops boss was meant to be a Neapolitan ice cream themed monster. Specifically, he starts out as vanilla, and the first time you whack him, he turns into chocolate, you do it again, he turns into strawberry, and after you hit him that 3rd time, he dies. However, he shouldn't just be floating there when you enter the level. I needed to make it so that he surprised you with the boss battle. So if you've been watching my other devlogs, you've seen a part where you have to collect a lever in this freezer level to progress. He will not be able to spawn until after you've collected this lever and gone back through this main area, at which point gates will lock you in with him, there will be a quick cutscene, and then you'll be fighting him. And to emphasize the fact that he's a Neapolitan-themed monster, I gave him a health bar that's essentially 3 scoops of ice cream. Vanilla, chocolate, strawberry. Let me know in the comments down below what you think of this. But I'm not quite done yet, there were a few more things I did. First, I added a smooth white transition for when you enter a scene or exit a scene, even if that's through dying. Felt a lot better than the quick cuts I'd been doing. Then I added Kevin to this freezer level in a few different ways. So hopefully you'll get pretty numb to seeing these cute characters as horrific corpses. And on that pile of bodies, that's the end of my devlog. Make sure you join my Discord, like and subscribe. Seriously. You might notice my voice, but I am feeling a little under the weather. I'm also going to blame this on the reason that every time in this video that I use the term occlusion culling, I accidentally refer to it as ambient occlusion. So anyway, over the past few months, you've seen me make multiple levels, you've seen me make all these fun little characters, and I'm finally starting to get to the point where I'm making horror elements. The scary stuff, the secret stuff that you're really not supposed to see yet, but I'll give you little glimpses here and there. I can't just stop making these devlogs after all, so I gotta show you something. And it has been a while since my last devlog, but part of that's because I'm trying to decide how much I can show you. The other part of that is because it was Christmas and New Year's, and then I actually went on vacation, so I'm back and I'm ready to show you what I've been working on. In fact, in the 2 months since my last devlog, I actually got an entire level done and a second level that's almost done. So let's get into it. The first one is the oven level, a dark red, hellish box that feels like you're in the ruins of a cathedral of lava and pain and suffering. And even more suffering because it was really laggy trying to record the footage for this. So I set up ambient occlusion and it was still a little laggy, but the game itself shows me that it's running at over 100 frames per second and I'm not noticing any lag, so it's just a recording issue. That being said, I'm sorry. So to enter the oven level, obviously you jump into the oven. However, the door has to be open for you to do that, and there's a special requirement that you have to meet that I won't tell you about here in order to open it. But when it's open, you just jump inside and you're in the oven level. So first up, I started playing around with the lava. I made it move slightly up and down. I made the objects in it move around as if they're floating in the liquid. And I also made all these particles that just kind of float off of the surface. This is meant to simulate the effect that incredible heat has. And why am I explaining? I'm making lava. You think you can just slap a lava texture in, but for everything like this, there are so many little things that go on top of it, and it's those tiny details that really come together to make a scene. Okay, so I'd made the environment, but your character wasn't just going to lay on a platform in the middle of a lake of lava forever, so I had to give him something to do. So first of all, let's give him a choice to make. Should he save someone? And you'll have to play the game yourself to make that decision. I'm not going to show you what happens. However, I am going to show you the main enemy in this level, the gingerbread demons. Like pretty much everything I make, it comes from a sketch. This is one of the OG sketches from when I first started making this game. And then when I finish that up, you add texturing, and a little trick I've learned, because Substance has gone up quite a bit in price since it was bought by Adobe, is find the best ways that you can to reuse materials. I mean, if you look at old Nintendo 64 games, they would have just an atlas with almost all the textures for an area, and just use the UV mapping to make them fit where they need to. These gingerbread demons have the same textures as the custom burnt skin that you can unlock for Toby, therefore requiring less materials in the final game. This little shortcut will save you a lot of time and maybe even some money depending on what you use to do your texturing. So after tidying that up and animating them and then putting them in Unity, it was time to give them a personality, or perhaps a lack thereof. These little gingerbread demons mainly stand around or carry on a loop of torture. It's impossible to know at any point whether they're going to attack you or just stare out past you as if you don't exist. And this inconsistent behavior makes it very difficult to be sure how to react to them at any given point. And I love that feeling in games, the unknowableness of an enemy. And you're gonna have to wait till you can actually play the game to see any more of this level because I don't want to spoil too much, but let me show you what the boss looks like. And since I can't show you any more of this oven level, I'll go ahead and move on to Grandma's room, the other level I've been working on. This is a level very different from what you just saw in the oven. It's larger, it's wider, it's got a lot to explore and see. Everything is made out of yarn and other soft, comfortable materials. There's even some things that are made completely out of crayon drawings, as well as having a few different fun faces to interact with. And in this level, you'll be tasked with finding pieces to make a sandwich for your picnic with Grandma. So first things first, I need to get rid of the lag. I do this pretty much every time I start a level now, ambient occlusion. I think it looks so cool every time seeing how much the game really can get rid of to keep your game running smoothly. Make sure you set that up as soon as you start game developing in Unity. Next up, I've got this bridge here that goes over this empty riverbed and lake, so I need to make water to go in that. So I decided to go with a quilted blue texture, and I need to make it move so that it looks like it's flowing downriver. And then also, because it goes to an end and goes down, I've got to create a waterfall effect as well. I think this ended up looking pretty well and very stylized for what this level is. Let me know what you think. Sometimes you just have to get creative and think outside the box when you're trying to make a kind of weird themed level like this. To make everything feel really good and cohesive, this should also extend to even the prefabs that you'd made to use throughout the game. For instance, I could have just taken this gold coin and put it in the level, but I decided to make a second material that looks more fabric-y to fit the theme of the level. And speaking of cohesion, there's also a skin that you can unlock for Toby that's made of fabric to fit this level. And hopefully, when you have all these little details adding up, it creates a real sense of immersion in this kind of weird setting that you create. And at this point, I get to do one of my favorite things in game development again and make a little friend who you can kill. So meet the ducks. One of the things you need to get in this level in order to make a sandwich for your picnic is bread. And where are you going to find bread in a park? The ducks. Ducks like bread. Kill them, get the bread. And I also tried something new with these that I thought was fun. I gave them a little exclamation mark above their heads when they notice you and they make a little sound. And then they just walk forward to check you out. Let me know what you think of that. These ducks aren't inherently hostile to you, although they can damage you if you hit them. And then I also added some variety to the ducks so they don't all look identical. And there you go. A bunch of little friends to kill. Cute. And for those of you wondering when the real horror was going to start, here's your arachnophobia warning. Because the next enemy I'm working on is called the Flesh Spider. So if that doesn't sound fun to you, you might want to get out now. Okay, here we go. Modeling, texturing, rigging, animating, which was particularly challenging because I had never done anything with more than 2 legs before, and then slapping him in the game. However, in this particular level, the yarn level, he's not at his full fleshy goodness yet. He's still made of yarn. Although that didn't stop him from already scaring one of the people I showed him to. So I set up his animations to test them. His idol is kind of cute. You could say it's cute, right? Maybe. But there's no denying when you walk around the corner and see that walking animation going, even when he's just stuck in place, it is a little much. Right? Let me know what you think in the comments. Are you excited to see more of the Flesh Spider? Are you excited to see him fleshy in the dark? Because it won't be long till I get there. And while this scary little friend is absolutely one of the best things I've ever made, let me know if you agree, let me show you the new type of collectibles I made for Grandma's room. Buttons. I started off by just making a collectible, and then I added a little particle effect. Then I made them in a variety of colors so that it felt more interesting to pick up. This included making the particles that come off of it when you collect it match the color of what you just collected. Not complex, but time consuming, but again, a thing that makes the game feel better to play. I also made it so that there are these metallic ones that are worth 2 buttons instead. Then I took them and hid them because they shouldn't just be right on the path, and I'm going to add even more. And then finally I made some UI up at the top of the screen so you could keep track of how many that you'd collected. And I'm intending for these to be one of the ways that you unlock one of the pieces you need for your picnic. Let me know in the comments what you think of this new type of collectible, and the Flesh Spider, and the ducks, and anything else I've done over the past 2 months that I've tried to relay in this video. I'm really craving your... Craving? That's a weird... I really want your opinion, so give it to me. I'm 3 Gnomes. So essentially this spider isn't meant to be too complicated. It's actually pretty simple. It just kind of paces around, it goes to one spot, waits a second, moves to another spot, waits a few seconds, then moves again until it sees the player, and then it charges at him, attacks, and then goes back to restart this cycle. It's not meant to feel like a very intelligent enemy. However, I immediately realized this was way too slow and it felt kind of weird, so I sped it up, and I thought this felt fine. This enemy didn't need to be anything too special. So I've been calling it a yarn level, but this is actually called Grandma's Room. And part of the whole thing about this is that you're going in and you're making a sandwich for you to have on the picnic with Grandma. And so you're going around and getting ingredients. But before I get to any of that, I needed to start with Grandma. So I started by modeling her in Blender, and even though you've seen this process time and time again, if you've seen my devlogs, I recorded it for you so I could splice it together, but I didn't realize that I had accidentally used the streaming option on my video recording software, so there was the grayed out little chat box in all of my recordings. Anyways, don't worry about that. This is Grandma, and I got her done and I slapped her into Unity, and yeah, there's Grandma. This is the moment I realized I was recording the wrong way.
Oh, what the
Next I had to animate her, give her a little idle animation, give her an animation for when you hit her with your stick, and then make it so you could talk to her. And you can see there she prompts you to get the ingredients, bread, meat, and greens, so I had to make it so you could collect those, and to start I made the UI for them. So when you collect each piece, it'll actually appear on the right side of the screen, and until you collect the pieces, there's UI there that's kind of grayed out, letting you know you need to collect that still. However, that shouldn't just be on the side of the screen when you start the level. You need to actually wait to have that prompted by Grandma asking you to get the ingredients, so I set up the coding for that. And now it's like you have a little grocery list. Next I made it so that you could do little quests for some of the characters hidden within this world, and they'd give you the ingredients, but I don't want to show you anything about that because I want you to actually explore and figure out who you need to talk to, what you need to do. But I made UI, particle effects, variables, all the things that you need for that. It was a lot of steps, but we're going to skip it so that I don't spoil anything. Okay, moving on. If you've ever thought about commenting or saying something in the Discord, I want you to know that I really love getting feedback. So here's an example. I posted on Facebook a picture of Grandma as I was working on her, and I got a couple comments, one of which being, "I would die for this woman," which, same. And the other one was talking about how it looked like she would herd crochet sheep. And that really got my gills? What am I, a fish? That got my gears turning, and I decided to add crochet sheep to this game. And yes, they are adorable, but you might be asking yourself, what do they do? Absolutely nothing. You can just smack them around, they make little sounds when you do it. That was my idea, so I started by just giving them a capsule collider and a rigid body so you could hit them and they'd roll. And that wasn't right, so I changed the type of collider, and now they kind of just bounced around and stopped instead of rolling constantly. So they're just fun to play with, and then I recorded the sound when you hit them, and a different one type sound for when you just kind of bump into them. And that's just a fun thing for you to do in the game. It's just another little thing you can try. So let me know what you think of the crochet sheep, and make sure you give me advice for things you'd like to see in the game. Who knows, maybe I'll just on a whim throw them in like this. Anyways, yeah, crochet sheep, fun. Although I should probably mention they are affected by enemies. Moving on. So after you've collected all the pieces for the sandwich, obviously you should be able to see the sandwich, correct? So I made that. So here's bits and pieces of me making a sandwich. Nothing too impressive, although I did remember to take the chat box off the side of the screen, so I had that going for me. Okay, sandwich made. That's as much as I need to show you for the yarn level. Let's move on to the new level I'm making, the bathroom level. For those of you who aren't very familiar with my work, if you haven't seen a lot of my devlogs before, you might be asking yourself, how does he go through levels so fast? How does he create them? And the truth is, I've been working on this game for a very, very, very long time, probably close to 5 years at this point. However, I've only been working on this game file with the programming I've been teaching myself as I've gone for about 9 months now. And so I made many, many levels when I was working with someone who was going to do the programming for me while I was waiting for him to get that done. And now that I'm working on my own in a new file, I'm pretty much just taking the scenes that I've already made and putting them into this new game file. That's what I did with the yarn level, the fridge level, the kitchen, pantry, all of those types of things. However, due to some type of issue in the other file, I'm having to hand make the bathroom based on pieces I already had, so it's pretty much just remaking a scene I'd already made in the other game. So all of the level design was already done, and I'm just trying to replicate it here. So one thing I really like about working alone is that now when I make pieces for a level, I can actually put my character in, pop in, and play around with what I just put into the level, which, as you can imagine, for a 3D platformer is very, very important. The person I was working with before, who I don't want to say anything bad about, it's just our working relationship wasn't good, we didn't end up being able to work together, was never able to get me a working version of Toby for me to use to, gauge how high something needed to be for you to jump on it, things like that, but now I can throw something in and just immediately play around with it. And that's something I didn't have when I was trying to work with a partner. Anyways, so I'm sure you're absolutely riveted watching me put appliances into a bathroom. You could see this while they're redeveloping any neighborhood, so How about I show you something a little creepier? The other bathroom that I was working on simultaneously. This bathroom, as you can probably tell, isn't in your house. This seems to be the bathroom of some sort of asylum. And while I would love to show you the entire process, I feel like at this point you're probably going, alright, let's get to the end result. So here, let's go back to the first bathroom you saw me working on, and here's what it looks like when you're actually playing the game. It's very dark, it's very foreboding. There are just little candles lighting bits and pieces of the area, so you never really know what's around you. And if you look to add to this feeling of not knowing what's around you, I also lowered the depth of field so that everything that's more than a little bit away from you is kind of blurry, out of focus, and the camera is a lot closer in on you. It's really meant to make you feel uncomfortable compared to the other levels you've been in. Okay, cool, so it looks scary, but there's so much more to actually making a level... I hit the mic. So much more to actually making a level scary. So next up, I took some of the music that was made for this level by the incredible composer Gabriel Calderon, who offered to make all the music for the game. He's just the best. And now with that music in the level, the entire thing feels a lot more smothering, suspenseful, just downright uncomfortable. He really is the master at what he does. Okay, so it looks creepy, it sounds creepy, it feels creepy to play, but you still need something in there to kill you. Otherwise, the fear is for nothing. And I want to make sure you have legitimate reason to be afraid. So I took the yarn spider, I'm sure you remember him, and I put his flesh skin on him, which was always the original plan, and then I popped him in the level, a lot smaller, and programmed him to murder you. So good luck exploring the dark. Oh, and if you think they're creepy here, remember that other creepier bathroom I was working on? Well, they also have these flesh spiders. Good luck. And then added something creepy to go in them. Spiders. And you guys had a lot of thoughts about the spiders. Brother Finrose Bowles said, I also feel like the spiders would be creepier if they made fleshy spider sounds and you could hear them walking around. And brother, I'm already one step ahead of you. So I didn't play the sounds last time, but here's the unedited recording of all of the sounds for the bathroom, including what the spiders sound like. So clearly not perfect and still some work to do, but trust me, it's gonna sound squishy. I also added the spiders to the other bathroom, so here's what that sounds like. Pretty creepy, huh? Since we're talking about comments, I want to re-emphasize that I read every single comment that you leave for me, so please do. For example, I got a comment from someone named Jaden who said, you should name the sandwich Wilson. The sandwich isn't a character, it's just a sandwich. But sure, canonically, the sandwich's name is now Wilson. And that sounds like fun, so that's my new game for you guys. Name every inanimate object. So make sure you leave in the comments what the table should be called, and the counter, and the sink. Not everyone who plays the game will know, but I'll know forever when I play it from this point forward. I'll be jumping on the bathroom counter like, oh, that's Samantha. I'm not picking on you, Jaden. I think most people would be surprised the sandwich isn't a character. At least in the type of game I'm making. Anyways, so looking back at my old concept art, I realized that the doors that lead into levels are all kind of inspired by one sketch that I made right at the beginning of the design process. And while that fits the tone of the game and the character, it leaves something to be desired, because I look back at the games I used to play, like Super Mario 64 for example, that have such a clear example of what the level you're going into is supposed to feel like. For example, the paintings you jump into. And I wanted to capture a little bit of the feeling of that, so that the doors aren't just generic. And so I went through and for every single level I created a custom door so that you can tell from the hub world what you're getting yourself into. And I thought this right away gave the hub world a lot more flavor, a lot more intrigue. So you've got the yarn level and the bathroom level, and I even made it for the pantry as well. And then there's also this other door that we're not going to talk about right now. And the door that's going to lead to your own little private sanctuary, your gingerbread home, is still going to have this same door design. And now that the hub world was looking a lot better, I decided to finally make something that's very important to this game. But I don't want to get ahead of myself, so first, let's talk about what crucial thing this game is still missing. Do you remember when I set up gliding and double jumping in one of the first devlogs that I made, and then I mentioned that they were going to be unlockable? Essentially, at this point, for the double jump and the glide, I had it checking constantly to see if you could actually do those, which added several more states to this FSM. And then I also made unlockable skins for you to collect in the game. And these aren't just going to be laying about in the world. The way that you collect these is by talking to the traveling merchant named Osborne, who will make these things for you, if you meet the right conditions and you have the coins to pay for them. Sometimes this will be finding certain items in the world, sometimes this will be finding a certain number of collectibles like trophies, or in the case of the upgrades, it's just getting enough coins because they're important to play the game. So in order to keep moving forward, I needed to actually make this traveling merchant, Osborne. So I started with a sketch that I made like all the way back in 2019, and then I started modeling it. He's kind of meant to be this weird mix of like a blacksmith and a baker. It's important just to go piece by piece, create it as you go, especially with characters that are even a little more complex, like Osborne here. Typically, the characters that I make aren't as inherently humanoid, or are in any way confined to the actual proportions of a human being. Not that he is, necessarily, but it's a lot closer than most of the other things I've made for this game. At some point I realized I wanted his beard to be brown instead of white, but other than that, he was pretty much exactly what I originally intended. So now Osborne was sculpted from the ether, but he didn't have life, so I put him in Unity and started playing around with him. I guess the first step to giving life to something is just making it not a ghost, so you can't walk through it, so that involves putting a rigid body on it, and a collider of some sort, and then things that are alive move and react to getting hit, so I made him some animations. And eventually you'll be able to talk to him and he'll sell you things, but for now I just gave him a very basic dialogue as a placeholder, because I wasn't prepared to set up a whole store. So yeah, that's Osborne, that's the baker blacksmith that's going to make things for you that you can unlock. Let me know in the comments what you think of his design, whether you like him, whether you don't, any other thoughts you have on him or the game. Anyways, next I realized that because there isn't an external door to the oven, I forgot to change the internal one, so I made that one unique like the others. Next, I took some steps towards something else that I knew the game needed, which was different voice acting. So far, the only ones that had done voice acting for the game were just me and my significant other. And I did most of the voices, but she very famously did Tilly, which you guys really seem to love. But I had a few buddies that came over to play D&D with me that I play with regularly, and I asked them if they would just do some voices, and now some of the characters have voices. So thank you, Dungeons & Dragons. Okay, so I stepped away, made voice acting, made Osborne, made all these other things, but it was finally time to go back to the bathroom and add some more scary things. Oh, that's not the scary thing, that's just a motorcycle driving by my house. Don't you think it's just so cool to ride a vehicle that screams, that literally moans and roars and screams? Isn't that like the coolest thing to be driving? Anyway, so I made these things called shower monsters. Technically, I made these a long time ago, but I never actually animated them or imported them into the game at all, so this was me doing that. And right out the gate, I hit a hiccup, which is that because I did this way back before I fully understood the connection between Unity and Blender, I set the wrong forward axis. So when I set it to just move forward as it turns to look at you, it kind of just listed off to the side, which was not a very difficult fix. I literally just needed to change the axis that it was moving forward on. And now it was very slowly chasing you down. Fun. And this big, slow boy is just one of 3 shower monster types. So this one just slowly follows you, never letting you get too comfortable staying in one place in the bathrooms. And then there's one that I call Lockjaw, who doesn't open his mouth and just kind of gets knocked around by you as much as you want. He's fun to play with. And this third one I call Springjaw, because he's waiting to clamp down on you if you get too close. However, his main prerogative is to just sit under drains and lick up the drips as they come down on him. So he's not too interested in you as long as you leave him alone. But yeah, these are the shower monsters, and they are something else you have to deal with while you're trying to explore the bathroom. And the last thing that I started to play with for this devlog was the idea of buttons, so that eventually I could learn how to use them and set up the store for Osborne, as well as the pause menu, and make it easier to change your skins or your candy canes or anything else that you've unlocked. So here's me just making a few basic buttons to play with it, but in the next devlog I will have an entire pause menu set up and Osborne's menu set up and a whole bunch of other things. So make sure you like and subscribe so you don't miss anything. It would really mean so much to me. Last week I mentioned that someone said I should name the sandwich Wilson, and then I made a joke that in the comments people should name every inanimate object in my game, and you guys took that and ran with it. So here's some of the names of things in my game. The sandwich is named Wilson, Toby's pants are named Timmy, the picnic basket is named Reginald, the health bar's name is Walter, and the coins are named Jimbo.
Jimbo.
Jim.
Eclipse Game Dev said that the tree must be called Tristan Soil, and because you didn't specify which tree, I'm going to choose this one. Also, someone did lock in that the bathroom counter is officially named Samantha. I'm also keeping a running list of all the names you guys come up with, so go in the comments and name one inanimate object in my game. So next up, it was time to learn how to start making buttons in Unity. And no, not those kind of buttons, because you know I've already made several of those. I mean UI buttons. I have no experience with these so far, and so it was kind of starting from scratch. So I just started by making a button and working from there. I labeled this button Get Toasty, and when you clicked on it, it was supposed to change your skin to the burnt gingerbread skin. And there were a lot of reasons why it wasn't working that I realize now, but at the time, I just wanted to pull up a button and play around with it and see what I could figure out on my own. But I eventually had to accept defeat. I looked up a tutorial and learned the basics of how buttons work in Unity with Playmaker, and then I tried again. I made just a default button and I was actually able to click on this one, so way to go tutorials. And so I changed it back to Get Toasty, and that was still clickable, so I hadn't messed anything up yet. And I have my cursor hidden on the recording software, so you'll just have to trust me that I'm clicking when I say I am. So now that I had mastered the basics of actually clicking the button, it was time to make it do something. So as I mentioned before, when you click the button, it's supposed to change your skin to the burnt gingerbread skin. So I made a new FSM to make that happen. It starts by listening for you to click on the button, and then when you do click on it, it sends it to the next state, which changes the integer of your skin state to the one that's associated with the burnt gingerbread skin. And so your skin should automatically change based on other FSMs that I have in place. So after it's done that, the next frame event is to go back to the initial state and listen for you to click on it again. So I tested this out to make sure it works, and oh boy, I got toasty. The dorkiest. Okay, good. So I had one button that did one thing, but I had a lot more work to go. So now that you had a button you could click on to get toasty at any point, I also needed for there to be a button you could click on to go back to normal. So I made that button. And then I set up the FSM, so when you clicked on that, it sent you back to your default skin. Simple enough, and it worked. And then to kind of round out this test system I'd been making, I made a third button and called it Oh God No, and then linked my most uncomfortable skin to it. And that worked as well. But these buttons all look kind of normal. They're all just default buttons, and I needed to know how to make them more complex and have unique art attached to them. I decided to really push the bounds a lot and try something new, and so I made the third button a candy cane. Would you believe me? Loser. So now I knew the basics of custom buttons. Next up, as you might have noticed, these buttons are just on the screen all the time, and obviously, they shouldn't be. So I set up an FSM to make it so that now the buttons only came up when you hit escape. So essentially it was kind of a makeshift pause menu for test purposes. So escape brings up the menu and then escape gets rid of the menu. Pretty simple. But there was another thing I needed to consider with pause menus that's actually pretty important, which is when you bring it up, the game should pause. Because otherwise the camera spins, and then when you click the button, the reason he's spinning is because it's still registering that he's attacking. So I just set a basic adjust timescale for when the game is paused, and I could have set it to 0 where the game pauses entirely, but I wanted to try setting it to like 0.1, just really slowing down time, because I've seen that effect in games before and it can be really fun. But then when I tried that out, there were several problems. And so now it kind of looked like I was just making a bad action movie where he moved in slow motion. And on top of that, just slowing down time to 0.1 doesn't make his action stop or his control of the camera slow down. So I still have the problem of when you're going to click on something, the camera moves and you register that you're doing an attack. So at this point I faced a choice. I could either commit to this slow down effect and disable certain actions when the game pauses, or I could just make it pause completely. And to be honest, I thought that slowing down time would probably have other issues that I can't predict right in this moment, so I just decided to pause time entirely when you pause the game. But because I couldn't help myself and I was playing with time, here's what the game looks like at double speed. He's got the zoomies. Finally, I added a fourth button that's just basically there to close the menu. Simple enough. And it was at this point I realized that even though time has stopped, it was still registering your attacks and your button inputs. So I realized I was still going to have to manually go in and disable these FSMs every time the pause menu opens. And that's not really a big deal. It's just, game design is kind of like a puzzle, where you figure out how all these pieces are going to fit together, and sometimes if you miss a vital piece, you just kind of have to adjust the way that you're doing things. Sometimes that's a big deal, sometimes it's not, but it's all part of the learning process. And ultimately, I know I'm going to come out of it as a better game dev. And I'm sure some of you are going, oh yeah, of course it doesn't stop button inputs when you slow down time. And yeah, of course someone who knows everything about how games work, who's made a full game before, would probably know that, but it's important to remember that I'm not making this for professionals. I'm documenting the process of me learning game dev from the most basic level and learning as I go. I don't try to frame myself as knowing everything or being the best. It's constantly learning, watching tutorials, and getting better as you go. And hopefully that inspires people who are interested, because it's easy to get into the cycle where you think, I don't know what I'm doing, I can't do this, there's so much I don't know. It's just about being okay knowing that you don't know things, and just being willing to put in the work to learn it. Anyways, are you guys tired of looking at this old menu? Me too. So I started making the actual pause menu. And I knew that I wanted it to look like one of those old recipe books that people used to write in. And I didn't just want to draw one, I wanted it to look like it was an actual book that pops up on your screen. So I just made a book in Blender and used that to create a 2D image that would serve as the background for the pause menu. And that was kind of step one. So now the base was done and I was pretty happy with that, and I already had it set up from the other menu that we made to pause time, so I used the same things from that. So the basics were done, but I found another problem, which is if you interact with a character or a sign or anything in the world, and then you open the pause menu while you're talking to them, it'll kind of open behind that. So pretty much I just needed to set something to trigger the dialogue to close when you open the pause menu. That wasn't hard to set up. However, because for a lot of these things I had set up a custom camera to zoom in on what you're talking to, that didn't automatically reset when you just close the dialogue. The camera wouldn't be reset, so you would be stuck moving around with this weird focused camera. It looked ridiculous, and I fixed that quick before all the spinning made me throw up. So, step 2 done. So I started adding the other things to the pause menu, just piece by piece until I had the whole thing set up. Essentially it's a menu on one side, and then on the other side is information about the level you're in and the things you still need to collect. So, for instance, when you collect one of the candy pieces, the pause menu will change to let you know that you've collected it, so you can keep track of what you still need to get in the level. And that took a lot of trial and effort, but I'm gonna skip to the part where that's done. So, step 3 through 35, done. And then finally, I had to make the customization menu. I say finally, but that's really just the last thing I'm showing in this devlog. I actually have to make things for every single one of these on the main pause menu. But customization is where I started. But before I go, let me show you something a little secret. So maybe, just maybe, unlocking different weapons and outfits might actually have an effect on the gameplay. Anyways, join my Discord. I demonstrated the customization menu last time, but since then I've fully completed the look of that. So now, as you can see, there are 6 options for skin customization and 6 different weapons for you to use and collect and unlock. And on the right side of the screen, there's a display of what you've currently got equipped as you click it, which I made custom art for every single skin and candy cane. So stepping back to the last devlog that I made, I mentioned that there's this golden candy cane that you can unlock, and maybe if you use it and touch things, it'll turn them to gold. Well, it does. But in order to set this up, because I hadn't made things in the game with the intention of being essentially interactable with your weapon, I had to go through and meticulously choose every single thing in the world that didn't already have a tag and tag it with an interactable tag so that the game would essentially know which objects could be turned to gold or affected in different ways depending on what they were coming into contact with, which was very, very, very slow going. But at the end of the day, I think it'll be worth it when you, the player, can just really turn anything you want into gold. Next, I focused on learning how to do manual cuts or different transitions between one camera to the other, but I won't spend a lot of time on that. Next, I made the settings menu, which is really simple, just essentially, first and foremost, a slider bar, which I made with some custom images, that goes back and forth and allows you to change the volume of the music. You might also notice that for the text, I could have just thrown a Unity asset level text up on the screen and just edited it that way, but to really fit the style of the recipe book, I went through and made all of the text look like it was handwritten, which I think gives a lot of personality, but it did take a lot more time. At this point, I thought the other side of the page looked kind of blank, and I had a fun idea for what to put there. So hopefully you enjoy that. There's also a secret second setting that you can unlock somewhere in the game, but I'm not going to touch on that anymore. You're just going to have to play it to find it. The next thing I did for this menu was make it so that you could now exit to the main menu, and then if you do decide to exit, it takes you to where the main menu will be, because I haven't made it yet. So now, taking a step away from the pause menu, I decided to make one of the first enemies that I ever designed, who is essentially just a sack of flour that sneezes. He's intended to be one of the first enemies you encounter, so that you can practice attacking and killing. I made a few changes to his design once I started modeling, namely I gave him more rounded features. I also took away his legs because I didn't think it was important that he needed to walk. He's essentially just blocking a door. He's sort of like a Snorlax. There's no mobility really needed. So with this design done, I just got to animating and gave him a idle, a death, and a sneeze, because obviously he needs to sneeze. Next, I just threw him into Unity, no animations yet, and just gave him a collider that will be interactable with you. But of course, I made the common mistake I make every single time, which is I forgot to hit is trigger so that you don't collide with it. Because of course, I'm not just trying to give this flower a force field around him. I'm trying to give it a range where he can detect things. So fix that, set up his animations, and now he had his idle, but he also had his sneeze, which actually didn't do much without an actual sneeze sound or anything else to make it look like he's sneezing. So I went into the video editing software that I use, which is Filmora, and I just recorded myself sneezing, or fake sneezing, and then I did my best to line that up with the movement that he was making. And now the sack of flour sounded like he was sneezing. But it wasn't enough to just sound like he was sneezing. I also wanted to add in some projectile flour from his nose when he sneezes. So cool, kind of looks and sounds like he's sneezing. But one of his main purposes is to annoy you as a player and get you to attack him so that you'll learn to attack in the early tutorial level. And the way that this is supposed to work is by clouding up your screen to essentially annoy you as a player and prompt you to just hit him. So I added that in. And this also adds to the fact that you just got sneezed on, really giving you that feeling. And now we had a sad, sick, little sneezing first enemy. And while he's awful cute sitting out here in the fridge world in the bright sunlight, he actually belongs in the tutorial pantry area, essentially just blocking an exit you'll need to go through to continue playing the game. So I put him in his home, and now he looked appropriately sad for the environment. And now that he was dealt with, it was time to take another friend I had made in the last devlog and put him in the home that he belongs in. So I took Osborne, who's supposed to make you things and unlock things for you, and put him into the fridge world. And believe it or not, he does have a purpose beyond just being a nice punching bag. So I went ahead and gave him a menu that you can open that will make it so you can purchase things from him. So as you can see, there are kind of three options there: upgrades, skins, and candy canes. And while the skins and candy canes are kind of obvious, they're just going to be the way that you can unlock new customization options. The upgrades actually give you direct access to new things that you can do. So first I made the menu for that, the upgrades, starting with double jump. And to get these, all you have to do is collect 10 coins from the world and then pay him, and then it unlocks. Simple enough. So I started with the double jump. And so once that was set up, I went ahead and added in the glide, and now you had both unlockable upgrades that you can get pretty much right at the beginning of the game. It's not meant to be very difficult, it's just meant to be a fun way to get new things to do and to learn how these menu systems are supposed to work. Ideally, so you'll come back and unlock the skins and the candy canes later. For anyone interested in how I actually set this up, right next to the thing where it says double jump or glide, there are 3 icons that'll come up. Either the one that shows it locked, the one that shows it with the key in it, or the one that shows it unlocked. If you don't meet the qualifications, so for instance if you don't have the 10 coins, it'll just show it locked. If you go to him and you do have the 10 coins, it'll show it with the key in it, so that you can click on it and then it'll switch to unlocked. And all of these had to work so that they would change if the conditions changed. So if you used all your coins on the double jump, it would automatically switch so that you'd know you no longer could unlock the glide without getting more coins. So a little complex, but that's essentially how it works. And then, of course, when you unlock them, of course I had to make it so that you could then use those abilities. So that was a pretty simple lock to make. It also occurred to me at some point that as fun as these things are, they're probably not intuitive for new players to just kind of figure out how to do these things. So rather than throwing a tutorial like on the screen after you unlock it, I just made it so that as soon as you click unlock, right below the option, it just briefly tells you how to do it, which I thought was a very simple solution. So the next thing I worked on for Osborne's menu is the unlockable customization option. So this will be how you unlock new skins and new candy canes. So there are essentially 3 steps that are involved with this unlocking process. So as you can see, there's a condition that needs to be met below the skin. Unlockable skin 1, and the condition is that you need to defeat the Burnt Lord, whatever that means. And then after you do that, you can come back to Osborne, and once that condition is met, it'll just give you a number of coins that you have to pay to unlock it. It's pretty much just a prerequisite amount of coins. Once you pay that, you'll know what the secret skin you just unlocked is, it'll give you a little icon, and then you can go through the pause menu to your customization options and equip the skin. So a simple enough system, you just have to figure out how to unlock the different things and pay the coins, which will hopefully encourage you to explore and see everything that I've got hidden within this game. After that, I went through and tried it with the next unlockable skin, just to make sure there weren't going to be any weird issues when you try and stack things like this. And thankfully, it seemed to work out fine. You can unlock the second skin. So from there, once I knew that was working, I went ahead and just did everything. And so here's a glimpse of some of the things you're going to have to do to try and unlock special secret skins in my game. After that, I went into the unlockable candy canes and started with the first one that you would need to get the silver key for as the prerequisite, and then it works the same way where you just pay the required amount of coins and then you unlock it and can equip it. Simple enough, and then I went ahead and did that for all of them. So here's some of the stuff you might have to do to unlock all of the candy canes. So I already started out this video by explaining that there is a secret skin for your weapon that will make it so that you can affect the world, you can change things to gold. But unlockable skins aren't the only thing in this game. There's also an unlockable different weapon, which operates pretty similarly to the candy cane, but just feels a little more real, and that is the crowbar, which actually is a different object. And I'm not going to explain to you exactly how to unlock this, but I will say it has to do with another secret I mentioned in this video. So good luck when you get the game trying to figure it out. That's kind of the fun thing about indie games. There's not going to be a player guide right away that's going to spoil how to unlock every secret. So good luck. I cannot wait for you guys to get your hands on this game. So thank you guys so much for your support throughout this entire process, and thank you for waiting so patiently. I know it's been a while since the last time I made a devlog. It has been a very rough couple months, honestly. First I had to go out to Montana for a work trip to do photos, and then I actually sewed through my finger at work with an industrial sewing machine, which put a hole through the bone, which was rough and took some recovery time, slowed me down quite a bit. And then this month I'm actually moving in with my significant other, so I've got that I've been dealing with as well. So it's been a really, really rough couple of months, but I'm excited to get back to work and get things popping out for you. So a lot of just adjusting and settling into this new situation that I'm in, but I'm excited for the future, and I'm excited to show you more of this game. So thank you. To start out, I made a new level, which is kind of a home base level that you can find where, essentially, as you unlock other levels, you can come back here and find new things in this area. But currently, it's just a liminal space. So for this level, my original concept was essentially having one central area that branches off into other little sections related to each level, and those will kind of fill up or become accessible as you unlock them. So I started by using the tool that lets you set the height to start raising different areas, and then I essentially blocked out a base concept for what I wanted to do, and I hated it.
Alright, you know what, this was dumb. Dump it. trash it. This one's garbage.
So instead, I decided to create a little central island that you start on, and then you can travel to these floating islands in the sky that are each dedicated to a level. So to start with, I just kind of had one little floating island, I made a gingerbread house, and that was it. And I decided it was time to import some Unity assets for basically just to make some things I didn't want to fool with making. I pretty much just imported some water textures and some custom foliage and grass and things like that. I even added in some flowers and mushrooms and other little things to just kind of make the island look nice. Since I actually had a water shader now that I'd imported, I decided to take it and put it into the fridge world and also add it on top of the custom yarn river that I'd made for the yarn level, so that around the edges it would just look a little nicer. And since I was already playing with the water, I decided to go ahead and throw it in the kitchen sink as well. So with your starting island made, with the gingerbread house and all the little decor around that, I started making the islands that are going to be floating in the sky. So essentially I just kind of made a big hill up out of the base of the terrain and then got rid of everything around it leading up to it. So it was essentially just a chunky floating thing in the sky. Then I took a cloud and kind of just popped it up underneath to create the illusion that it was a floating island on a cloud. Okay, so this first floating island is inspired by the pantry, so it shouldn't just be grass. I actually took the texture for the ground tiling in the pantry level, and I made that into a terrain texture so I could paint it directly onto this island. Now to complete this island, I just added in the trophies for the two characters that are in the pantry, as well as adding just a bunch of little bits and bobs from that level on top of this island, just kind of to set the vibe. So now the obvious question was, well, how do you get up to the island in the sky? My original concept was to essentially just take bits and bobs from the level that you're trying to get to and have them just essentially be platforms for you to climb your way up to that level. I even went through the process of making it so that it won't appear until you jump on this stool that's essentially sticking out of the water, so that it's not just ugly bits and bobs floating in the air all the time. But I still didn't like how that felt. It felt like you had to try to get up to the higher levels to see your trophies, and I didn't want there to be any sort of fear of losing or failure or inadequacy, that you're not doing good enough at the platform. You should just be able to go from point to point. So I got rid of that and essentially just made it where now you would teleport up there. To serve as the conduit for you to teleport from point to point, I put in these pedestals with these mystical egg gem things on top, and then put the logo for each level floating in front of it so that you would know which level you're teleporting to. And those will unlock as you go to those levels. And of course there will be one of those for each level, so there'll actually be quite a few of those kind of dotting this little island. You can use those to teleport up to an island, and then if you go backwards, you'll find a way to teleport back to the starting island. So an easy way to transverse without any headache at all. Cool, 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 cool. So now I could not restrain myself any longer. I was being driven crazy by the way that Toby moved. When I first set him up, I had just started to learn how Playmaker was working, and I made a lot of things wrong. I messed him up quite a bit. He's fun to play, but I knew that there were a lot of things that were wrong. For example, every time that he attacks, because the way that the collider is set up to deal damage to enemies, he lifts up off the ground, just the tiniest bit, and it's always driven me crazy. So I fixed that. Simple enough, he no longer floats when he attacks, but that was a slippery slope because I'd been wanting to do other things with his movement. I hate how when he falls on his face, he just stays there. I wanted him to have like a cool jump out of that, similar to when Mario in Super Mario 64 crouches and then he jumps out of that. It's higher. I kind of wanted something like that. Originally, when he fell on his face, you'd do that by pressing Q and holding it down, and he would essentially stay on the ground. He would keep velocity and just slow down, but he would stay down until you let go of Q, and then he would pop up, essentially just standing up, not jumping. And I wanted it to be so that if you slide onto your face, and then you press the jump button, you would maintain the velocity, but be basically propelled into the air. So as you can see, it started out as just a little pop-up onto your feet, but with the backflip animation, and then I started making it so that you would be actually thrown higher, and then I went a little too high the first time, and then I wanted to make it so that the velocity continued forward even faster, so I tried that and messed up the first time, and then finally I had it right. And if you could time it up perfectly, this was a really quick, really efficient way to make it through the map. It doesn't look, I guess, the coolest when you're just watching it, but playing it, if you time it where you land on your face and you immediately pop up into that jump, you can really cruise through and it really feels nice. And that's kind of what I wanted all along. And also because launching yourself up out of this is the highest jump you can just do casually, allows you to reach new areas if you use it efficiently. And finally, even though I know the game didn't need it, I wanted to put in a first-person mode. I thought that would add to the horror and make it a little creepier when you're exploring, and also give you a way to look at things from a new angle. For example, with this fort here, if you wanted to see inside, it's very difficult from third person, but if you could pop into a first-person view, you'd be able to see inside. Also, certain areas might be creepier if you're choosing to go into first person. And again, I know it wasn't necessary, but it's something I wanted to do because I thought it would be fun. So first off was figuring out how to do that, because I'd never done anything with POV cameras before. So I started by just setting one up and seeing if it just worked, and it didn't, because the camera didn't really move and it wasn't linked to Toby anymore, so it was just looking around at the map, and you could still move Toby independently of that, but it was very silly. And in fact, I didn't even know that Toby was still moving until I heard the coin. So I spent some time fiddling with that and got that working, and now it would pop to his point of view when you held down the shift button. As it was set up, you were kind of just inside his head, so he was just awkwardly there, so I had to make him invisible when the camera jumped to him. And so to start out and just make sure that that was working, I just made it so that when he held shift, instead of the camera moving up to you, you would just turn invisible, just to make sure that was working. So then the camera worked, which was awesome. You could pop into his point of view and he would just disappear. So it was working smoothly. It was kind of awkward though when you attacked enemies, because you couldn't really tell what was happening, and I wanted you to be able to do that. You get popped out of it if you take damage, but I wanted you to be able to attack enemies from first person if you wanted to. So I just made it so that even though you stayed invisible, your candy cane would show up when you swung it. So that solved that. Now I had a fun little first person mode that you could pop into anytime that you wanted to get a better look at things or experience the game in a different way. All of your movement still worked, it's just now the camera was right from Toby's eyes. Next up, I started working on this little recurring area that's based on kind of a psychiatrist's desk that you'd run around on. So not too complicated, I just started by making the pieces individually in Blender. You know, a coffee cup, a metronome, a desk, a little pair of glasses, a lamp, you know, the things that you'd expect. Imported them piece by piece into Unity, and then started putting them together into a cohesive little level. For this level, the camera isn't going to be changed. It's going to be fixed, locked on a specific view that you're going to get of this desk, and you're just going to be able to move around in that space. So once I got all of that set up, including animations for the metronome, things like that, smoke effects for the cigarette, the final piece was just adding the post-processing to make everything really come together. And I'm not going to tell you too much about what this level is about, but I really love how it ended up feeling and capturing exactly what was in my head when I saw it all done. How does it make you guys feel? Tell me in the comments. One final thing I did fix in this devlog that I'll mention is actually back in the home base level I was working on. Originally I had it set up so that if you went to the water, you died, which is kind of just how a lot of things are set up, and I need to stop doing that because it takes you back to a loading screen, it resets you, there's no need for it, so I just made it now so that whenever you jump into the water, you're teleported back to the home island. So there's no death in this level, you can't die. If you fall into the water, poof, you're right back where you started. And I need to adopt that model for a lot more of my levels, because especially the levels that are heavy in platforming, like the transition level up to the freezer, having to do a loading screen every single time you die is going to be a real headache, so I also plan to set those up kind of similarly. Maybe with those you will take a point of damage. I'm also planning to set up checkpoints along those paths so that you don't have to restart completely as well, so that'll tie all together. Anyways, that's a lot of what I've been doing. I'm so excited to show you other things that I've already done that I'm just not going to put in this devlog yet because they're not complete. For example, I'm really excited about this one. We had the competition when I hit 1,000 subscribers, like and subscribe by the way, to design an enemy for my game. A lot of people in my Discord did this, and the winner was Brovia. That's probably not how you say it, but I've been playing Curse of Strahd. I don't know if any of you play D&D. And so I've been at the village of Brovia. Anyways, what am I talking? Brovia won the competition with this cool flaming pie enemy. And so I made that and put it in my game, and I'm just putting the finishing touches on that, and then I can show it off. So make sure you like and subscribe so that you catch the next devlog where I'll talk about that and everything else that I'm working on. So thank you so much for watching, and I asked my Discord what my sign-off should be. In one of my past devlogs, I showed off the pause menu that I'd started making, and at the time I'd only made the settings menu and the customization menu and the ability to exit to the main menu. So I started working on the character screen, which will allow you to keep track of the characters that you've interacted with in the world. Pretty much when you talk to one, ideally, they'll immediately pop up in your book and you'll have a cute little icon that you've unlocked for them. So I started by just adding a few of those in and testing it to make sure it would work. And testing again. And testing again. And that worked, and then I had to just do the grunt work of making actual little profile images for every single character in the game, which is one of those tasks that's fun, but also it just drags and feels like it takes forever to actually get done. Anyways, I like having all the little silhouettes, and then they pop up as you explore the game. Ideally makes you think about all the different things that are to come that are you're gonna unlock, and that was fun. And now let's talk about the winner of the Discord challenge that I did when I hit 1,000 subscribers to design an enemy. We had a lot of good designs, but the winner ended up being Barovia, who made a flaming spider pie enemy design that I really liked and I thought would work really well in both the fridge world and possibly even the oven. So I got to work 3D modeling it, trying to stay as true to the original design as I could. It wasn't an incredibly complex design, really, but I really wanted to make sure that it fit exactly what the person created, because I absolutely loved the design. When it was finally done, I threw it over into Unity and began playing around with it. I thought it looked good, but it was a little flat because none of the textures had been made outside of Unity. I was just going to recreate them inside. So there was, just flat, no normal textures or anything. So I began doing that. I started with the pie crust. And then I did the legs, trying to make them look like apple pie filling. And then I just added some slight texturing to the pan, and some of the subtler details are hard to see, but I still think they matter. It's those little subtleties that I think really make games feel like they're more realistic. So if you're making games, make sure you don't overlook those. If you think nobody's going to see this, you might be right, but the people that do will appreciate it. And also, I think the subconscious mind picks up on the little details that aren't obvious, and it all kind of just adds to the feeling of, oh, there was a lot of attention put into these types of things. So don't go overboard with it, but also don't underestimate your detail work. So there are a few different states that the creature goes through. So I started by just setting it at the animation I made for kind of an idle, relaxed state. Little legs, more friendly eyes, a lot lower to the ground, kind of just a cute little pie sitting there. And then I gave it a makeshift way to kind of tell if something, well, namely you, are in front of it, and then it would react to that and change shape, but essentially it's just a collider in front of it. Real simple, just to give it a way to know if you're in its field of view. After that, I set it on fire. Ideally, the fire will only pop up like this later after it's been kind of activated into attack mode, but for now it's just going to burn all the time. Now that it was nice and hot, I decided to go ahead and start adding some coding onto it. So the first step was just activating when you walk into its field of view, and it'll change shape. Essentially, it has a reaction, an animation that's essentially just like noticing you and shifting into a more aggressive stance. So I tested that just to see if it actually recognized that you walked into its field of view before I got more complicated. Next, I made what was essentially just the animation cycle of the character, where it would start in idle, and then once you walked into its field of view, it would switch to the attack, and then it would chase you down, and then it would bite you, and then essentially it would just return to its place and go back to idle. So rinse and repeat. And the first time I set it up, it actually didn't work too bad compared to some of my first attempts. Maybe I'm getting the hang of this, but I did realize that I didn't actually set up the rigid body that would essentially give it gravity and make it an object that's kind of semi-interactable. And so it flies around. So I gave it gravity, and then I set the distance that it's going to try and track you down to be way too low of a number, so it tried to get too close, and then it would just get caught in a loop of never registering that it was close enough and attacking you. But it deals damage when it hits you too. So I fixed that, and then in the process of messing around with some of the other settings, I ended up making it do this, which is not ideal, although it is absolutely hilarious. And it didn't take long to figure out what I'd done wrong. I won't get into all of it here, but it was a quick fix. It was just so funny to see him attack, because he actually was kind of scary and then just roll off. Just roll away. Just roll off a cliff. So that was a little bit of fun. So now I had, basically set up its attack loop, but I didn't have a way for you to kill it, so it would just keep coming after you again and again and again. So I had to set up a way for you to essentially attack it. It's only a one-hit enemy, but you hit it once and then it dies. And I had this really dramatic animation that I made based off Brovia's original concept art, which I thought was really cool. But I added one little thing, which is that it explodes. I just thought it kind of was dramatic for a flaming enemy to explode. Thought it was an original idea.
Oh, these aren't homemade. They were made in a factory. A bomb factory. They're bombs.
Well, shoot. So the flaming pie spider enemy was done. I just had to add him to the list of characters in the new character menu that I'd set up. And obviously, looking at it like this, it's probably pretty clear. I don't necessarily show you linearly. What am I trying to... can I even speak at all? What am I doing today? I don't show you what I'm doing in a way that's exactly the order that I did it. It's not a linear process that I'm necessarily showing you. For instance, I worked on the character menu for a while, making the icons, and eventually I got kind of burned out on that, so I switched over to work on the pie enemy and completed that, and then made its profile image and went back to doing the character menu. I jump around a lot because I feel like it keeps you from getting stuck focusing in on a task, and then the game starts to feel like you're never going to get it done. There's too much to do. So I jump around. It's just easier for me to explain it to you in these videos in a linear fashion. And that's one thing I'd recommend. If you're working on a game and you feel like you're just getting overwhelmed and something that you're doing is really repetitive, if you can, if it's not going to mess everything up, try stepping away to some other little thing that's on your to-do list and getting that done and then coming back. Splitting up tasks can really save your mental health, really, trying to work on a project. So I can't stress that enough. And if it seems like I'm really hyper-focused on each task I do, I promise you I'm not. I just know when to step away and when to come back. So now that was done, I turned my attention to something else that I'd been putting off for a long time, which is the hub world. So this is what it looks like from outside. I know that kind of ruins the magic, but currently I've only shown you kind of the view of you jumping around in the space. But if you go up to the window, for example, you're looking out at a white empty void. So I needed to make it look like you were actually in a cottage, so it needed to have like an outside. Because I don't know about your grandma's house, but I don't remember mine looking like this. So step one, make it where it's not floating in the air and put grass down. So I just kind of set a terrain outside, which is just a Unity tool if you're not familiar with Unity, and painted it to look grass-like, so it wasn't anything too complicated. I added a little bit of shaping, and then I went to kind of test, see how that looked. And I realized that apparently I never put colliders on the windows, so you could just jump out into another liminal space. And again, everything doesn't line up, and it's not going to look realistic, and it's not necessarily intended to, if that makes sense. But it was a start. So now that I had the ground done, I decided to go ahead and start adding the trees. Essentially at this point, I just wanted to start layering things to create a semi-realistic outdoor area for the house. So I put out some trees, kind of just Unity asset trees. I didn't try and break the mold and make my own trees for something that is going to be pretty much just out of focus once the post-processing is in place. So yeah, I threw up some trees. I even shrunk some down and put them in front of the windows so that it would look like little bushes. And I didn't think that was too bad, but there is still the issue of the fact that you can see the horizon in the distance, because obviously I can't put thousands of trees to recreate an actual forest. So what I did is just use a flat image of trees and put them kind of around the perimeter to create the illusion, when it's all blurred out, that there is an extending forest past where you can see. And I think that's really all I needed. I added a few more little things, like adding siding to the side of the house so that it would look like you're looking at a house and not the wallpaper of the inside, as well as a mailbox and some other little things around. I might add some more, but now the hub world actually looked like a realistic semi-space, you know what I mean? Instead of just a house in a blank void. And of course I've got some lighting things to figure out and yada yada, but you just got to start somewhere. So that was the exterior of the house. Now the hub world looked like a more realistic space instead of just a temporary level. And anyways, I've been working on more things, but I'm going to wait to the next devlog to show you. In the past, when people have asked me questions about the story, I've been kind of vague because I didn't want to spoil anything, and I still don't, but I think it's time I give you a premise, and make sure you stick around to the end of the video for this one. The game is about a gingerbread man, obviously, who is exploring to find out why his creator's mental state is starting to decline. And to do so, you'll have to explore this big big for you, hub world house that's very 1950s inspired, that seems abandoned, and try and figure out where everyone is and what's going on and what everything that you're experiencing and seeing means. So it is a narrative game, just in a more abstract sense, where it's up to you to kind of figure out what the narrative is. Additionally, obviously if it's a hub world, there are other worlds that it connects to, and you're able to go and explore all of those, and those also have different answers. So that's enough of me pitching the game to you and explaining, and let's start talking about what I actually did for this devlog. So to start out, I finished the pause menu. Done. If you saw my last devlog, I was working on the character section, and I got the settings and all of that stuff done, and this time I got the inventory done. As you might have just saw, there's a new collectible that you can grab as well throughout the game, which I'm calling Occult Pages. On a surface level, as you find these, in your inventory it'll unlock pages to show new orbs that you've discovered. But below the surface, the amount that you collect actually affects the state of the world as well as a lot of other things, including possibly unlocking certain alternate endings for the game. So kind of an important one. So one thing I do pretty regularly is go back and kind of look at the original concept art I had for each level just to make sure what could be improved or what could be changed to make it fit the original vision more. And I realized one of the big things that the fridge level was missing was the actual feeling of a land at war, because even if one side was majorly winning, the original vision was for there to be a war happening. So as I always do, I found something that I had put off that now I needed to do to kind of make the scene complete. And it seems like a simple thing, but I decided to start with the cannons. So that we have these cracker cannons here that originally weren't doing anything, they were just sitting there. And now I wanted them to be blasting the other kingdom. So I started by just giving them some basic fire, and then animating them so they do a poof, poof, and then blasting. And I even set it up so that there was a big explosion on the other side to kind of correlate with it. And I loved how that felt. That already made it feel like you were in an active war zone. And even more so when you're actually on the other side, sometimes actually taking the cannon fire. And then to just kind of complete the look, I set a lot of the destroyed buildings and the castle on fire. So one thing that you'll discover as you're playing the game is that certain choices you make will actually drastically change the way a level looks. A lot of the levels have alternative states depending on your choices. For example, the fridge world typically might look like this, but depending on what you do, it can also look like this. So there is a lot of reason to actually re-explore areas that you've been through already. Next, since I now had like a really nice looking fire, I decided to get rid of the stylized fire that I'd created for the freezer section. Again, it's one of those situations where I knew it wasn't perfect, but I had to get it done. And now I can make it perfect. Next up, I started working on a checkpoint system. A lot of the more intense platforming levels, I felt like it was necessary to give certain checkpoints along the way. So I kind of just used the candy cane design and put it in basically to set it up where it's a post, and then it's in the ground, and then it'll pop up when you get close to it and actually light up with fire and sparks. And then all I had to do was kind of just set it up as a respawn point in case you die. Next, I turned my attention to the hub world because I felt like it just still wasn't exactly what I wanted. It didn't have the look I needed. So I started by fixing the fridge because that had been bothering me. And then I went in and updated the material of the floor to give it a better texture. And then I played with the lighting a little bit. Then I actually started really fine-tuning the post-processing effects. So this is what it looked like before, just very bland, very cool-toned. And then this is what it looks like after with all the post-processing effects added. A kind of warm, Sunday morning, late afternoon, hard to tell, just comforting vibe, with just a soft, warm glow to everything. And then now that it had a warm glow, the sky didn't match. So I found one that did. I added some curtains up in the kitchen. I added some more platforming, specifically added some hand towels along the wall over by the oven and the sink. And then I made it so the pans could also be used as platforms. And then I added in the shelving and some other decor for the level. I put a picnic basket in with some buttons around it, and I put some stuff on the coffee table, and then I also put a rug, a runner, down the length of the hallway. And at this point, I thought it was looking perfect. So a lot of you have been saying that you think the game needs a drop shadow, specifically Toby needs a drop shadow underneath him to help with the platforming, and I know that tends to be a pretty common staple of the genre. So I went ahead and started fooling with that. A lot of times when I'm sort of playing with new things, I like to do it in a file that isn't my main game file. So I actually just kind of messed with it a little bit in the old Game Jam file that I had. And with some trial and error, didn't work at first, I eventually got the shadow to kind of follow you naturally. And I put it in and I tried it in Toby's Topsy Tale, but I just didn't like how it looked with him. And to be honest, maybe it's because I've played it a lot, but I didn't feel like it was something that was actually strictly necessary, especially not if I was giving you checkpoints along the way. After that, I turned my attention to the lava in the oven, and at this point, a lot of the feedback that I got from my partner helped me change a lot of the things in these next couple levels I'll talk about, specifically like the lava. She thought that it needed a little bit more like chunks in it, and it needed to just have a little bit more intense of a look to it, and I agreed with that. Another great thing that my girlfriend pointed out about one of my levels, the yarn level specifically, is that there didn't seem to be a lot of movement. It was kind of stale. And so I added in a bunch of bees that kind of fly around that you can actually interact with, and snails, and there's bunnies and birds, and added in some stumps that were just kind of around to give some height variance. I put in some lily pads, and then I also just made the trees kind of go up and down in different groups, so that there was some movement amongst those as well. And all in all, I think that made the level pop. Next up, it was time to add in the one stretch goal that I reached for the Kickstarter that I did for this game, which is the Funhouse skin. And that's a skin you can unlock in a slightly different way than the way that you unlock the rest of the skins. But I'm not going to tell you how to get it. Play the game, find the secrets. After that, I finally put in the Avocado King, Lord Avocado, into his castle inside the Fridge World. Now, I'd modeled and textured him a long time ago, but I'd been putting him off because I wanted to make sure that I had a really good grasp of all of the mechanics and the coding so that he could be really exceptional. I wanted him to stand out, so now I felt like I was at a point where I could make him great. So I started working on him. I basically just gave him a little idle animation, and yeah, I pretty much just started with him, but I got him into the game. So next up, I started on a section that's a little bit different than everything else. It's going to be a brief moment where you're actually going to be in first person. So I started kind of messing with that, with some funny things popping up as I tried to get that going. But then, ultimately, I ended up really liking how it worked when it was all kind of figured out, and there's still more work to do on that, but you pretty much just have a little flashlight you can turn on and off, and I love how it looks. Let me know what you think. And I'm going to cut the devlog there, make it a little shorter than maybe I normally do, because I have some really exciting news. Hi, I'm 3Gnomes. I'm an indie game developer, and if you've been watching any of my past devlogs, you'll know that I've been working on a psychological horror / 3D platformer. And I've been working on that for a long time. And this will be my 20th devlog, and also my last devlog. Because I'm so excited to say that in less than 3 weeks, on October 17th of this year, Toby's Topsy Tale is scheduled to be released. There are multiple trailers up right now. You can go and watch those. If you're interested, you can go wishlist on Steam directly from the description of this video. I'm just so excited, and if you're like me, you watch a lot of devlog content here on YouTube, and it gets to the point where it feels like very few of these games you kind of get invested in ever come out, and it's kind of disheartening. And that's why I'm so excited that if you've been following these devlogs, this game is coming out. And considering this is the first indie game I've ever made and released on Steam, it would mean so much to me if you would go and help me make this game everything that it can be. Wishlist, and then when the game comes out, hopefully you'll consider buying if it's your type of thing. But anyways, here's the last devlog, where I'm going to talk about some of the last things that I did without spoiling too much of the end game of this game. So first off, there was one more level that I really needed to get done. It was essentially a ritual area where you did something. It's so hard to talk about any of this game at this point without spoiling things, so I guess here's your spoiler warning. I'll not spoil big things, but if you want to go into this completely fresh, maybe don't finish this one. So there is an area where you need to perform some sort of ritual that's hinted at through a lot of the in-game dialogue as well, so it's not too big of a spoiler. And of course the first step is just making a blank level. And then I put in one of the things that I had modeled that's a part of the ritual, which are these pillar type things with a crystal on top. And then I did a lot of work. I'm going to skip through all of the little nitty gritty details of the specifics of level design, because I've talked about this same type of stuff again and again and again. But essentially the end game was to create what appeared to be a sort of forest with this ritual site in the middle of it. So I put in the work. I laid down the terrain, the grass. I did use some Unity assets for the trees, which is something I try not to do. If you're someone who uses Unity assets, again, I'm not attacking you or anything. I've used a little bit, but I prefer to make my own assets for anything that I think is very specific. But anyways, trees, flowers, if they're just basic, I don't mind just taking what Unity has to offer. So anyways, I made this forest area, and I think one of the big things that will distinguish your levels from just being a forest to being something that is very, very unique and eye-catching is lighting. So I made sure that the lighting was very dark and intense and foreboding, similar to another level that I've created previously. And then when you mix that with the light that's going to come off of these torches, then that really creates a sort of ominous effect, especially in tandem with your flashlight. And then next, now that I had this ritual area sort of set up, at least in terms of the basic look, next I had to make it so that there was the gate. And I'm not going to spoil too much about that, except for it can be activated if you... if you play the game and you do things I'm not going to spoil here, you can activate the gate. And that was a really beautiful thing to create. I really had this crystal clear image in my mind of how I wanted it to look, and it came out perfect. I love how it looked, and that transports you to somewhere that I can't talk about. Do you see why it's been so long since I've made another devlog? It's like half of the content that I've made would completely spoil the game because I've been so close to being done that it's in-game content. It's content that would just ruin your experience if I told you too much about it. Or at least ruin the end of the game. Right, so we got this cool gate, we got this forest area, cool. Now you can perform a ritual and blah 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 blah. So let's cut to something else. Next, I wanted to add in a mechanic with the freezer level and a unlockable weapon that you can get, which is the sort of lava forge candy cane. And I wanted to make it so that there were all these ice blocks in the freezer level that you could essentially only interact with if you had this specific candy cane unlocked. And essentially you could bust characters out. So I started with just the one over here with Kevin and tested that out. And now you could free him. Looked good. Cool. And so that was another quick little mechanic that I could throw in that would just give you a little bit more to do. After that, I had to make another level, which is sort of a transitional level between one bigger one and another bigger one. This one was actually supposed to go between the pantry and the kitchen. And essentially this is one of the early tutorial type areas. So it's more meant to help you learn the mechanics of the 3D platforming. So as you can kind of see, I originally started playing with this kind of abstract, just pieces of pantry material and wood in open space, which is something that I do with later transitional areas. But I didn't like that so early on because it just has to do with the narrative and how your character perceives the world. And I wanted it to feel more like you were actually inside the walls of your home. So I put in walls to kind of give the feel of this being a kind of more well-lit place. I added in all of these little fireflies that I made, which I thought were kind of cute, and just gave a little bit more natural lighting to the area. I also put in Osborne so that you could get the upgrades that you need to actually complete this level right here, rather than having to wait to the fridge world, which you previously had to. So now you could get your upgrades, you could platform up, learn the mechanics a little bit better, and then after this it would pop you back into the top part of the kitchen. Cool, so this level was fundamentally done, except for there was one other character that I wanted to put in, which is, his name's Wilfred. He is a daddy long legs, and he is the reason why there are coins everywhere. And he was super fun to make, and I love how his area ended up looking. Probably one of my favorite things I've ever made. It was really incredible. And yeah, let me know what you think of him and this entire level in the comments. So next up, I made a change that my partner had been just constantly begging me to do, which was to fix how the fridge world lighting looked. So essentially this was like one of the first levels I ever made, and I felt like I had to just do classic, oh, the sky is blue, the grass is green, which you don't have to do. And so it was kind of very basic looking, and it was very stark lighting. So my partner prompted me to try and play around with other skyboxes and color schemes. So I did. We ended up loving this kind of pinkish sky, and I thought this just made this fridge level pop. Because there's this version of the fridge level, which is very friendly and colorful and bright and happy, and I needed it to contrast more with this very stark, dark version that you can find yourself in later in the game. And so I think this change just really made things pop, and I'm so glad she kept pushing me to do it. Next up, I made just a very, very basic version of what the opening menu of the game would look like. It started it with just a play button, nothing too complicated, intro, you know, all of that type of stuff. And then I'll come back to that later, because I essentially just wanted to have a placeholder for now. And while I was taking my girlfriend's advice, I went ahead and fixed another thing that she despised, which was this house and the way that it had been made. Again, I tried to cut corners, and that was a mistake because it looked like crap. So essentially, I just made very flat images of 4 sides of a house and just tried to use that in this 2D study area, and just to see if it would work, and it didn't. And so I actually did take her advice and go in and model an actual house and redo some of the art so it would line up a little bit and actually look 3-dimensional despite being 2-dimensional. From there, I went ahead and started messing with the coins that are going to be in this study level. I'm calling it a study level, but it's really kind of a 2D level in 3D space. I don't know why I'm trying so hard to describe it. You can see it. I love how it looked, but I wanted to make sure that things are really cohesive. So I went ahead and took the coins and I essentially just made a 2D texture to go on them so that they would look similar but fit the style of the level better. And this level is sort of like a foil for the yarn level, where they have a very similar layout to some degree and certain recurring themes and parts of the level. So I went ahead and took the same bridge and restructured it so that it would fit this level better. And I did the same thing with the well, and now you had 2 separate things that were from the yarn level that were repurposed and reformatted to fit this level and the style of it better. And I had a lot of fun actually redesigning them in that way. And there's a lot more I can show you about the study, but I'm going to cut away for a while. I'm essentially going through this in the way that I did it, rather than necessarily showing you, oh, this is everything I did for the study, and this is everything I did for the fridge world. I'm essentially just letting you see my process a little bit more, even if it might feel a little more chaotic for you. And that's something that I would advise a lot of new indie game developers to do, is don't get too attached to one area. When you start to feel burnout, if you can get yourself excited about doing something else in your game, do it. Progress is progress. So next up, I kind of jumped over and redid the intro section of the first level a little bit, where essentially it would pan over to you and the type of lens would change to kind of give a fisheye effect a little bit, to show the environment more and to play with your perception. And then from there, I went on to adding tutorial messages that would pop up to just give you little bits of information, little hints on how to play the game a little bit better, and that wasn't too complicated. One of those tutorial message pop-ups actually ended up being for the ice blocks that you can break, to let you know that you can do that, or at least hint that you can do that. From here, I started playing around more with the asylum area and doing a bunch of stuff in here that I probably can't even show you. But again, I love how these levels look, and it was a really good time getting to go in and actually spend more effort making them look as wonderful as they can possibly look. So I can't wait for you to get in the game, which is coming out in like 3 weeks. It's still crazy to get to actually hear what you think of it and see it. It's wild. But yeah, the asylum. Not going to spoil too much about that. I went in and added some more to the study, which I can't talk about, so go play the game as soon as it comes out, so you'll just know. But yeah, here's a look at it. At this point, I finally was able to bring in the other voice actor that's been working with me on this project to record the therapist lines for this entire game. And that allowed me to finally really get things going in terms of adding the narration and the real narrative to this game. And of course, it all starts with the very beginning of the game, so I went ahead and added that in, and while I was at it, I finished the kind of start menu and the lead in to the game. I went into the bathroom, added the sock snake so that he only pops up out of the drain when you defeat the spider. I sound nuts trying to describe what what happens in this game, which I guess fits. Yeah, spent some time in the bathroom, moved back on to fixing some of the stuff that the playtesters had pointed out to me. Specifically, like, there's this cabinet and it's kind of difficult right at the beginning. You go into it and the camera kind of locks up inside there. It's hard to maneuver it, it's confusing, and it's right at the beginning of the game, so it feels really jarring for your camera to immediately get stuck. So I went ahead and just made it so that now when you go in there, the camera shifts and locks in place at this kind of disturbing angle. And then when you come out, it obviously shifts back to normal. And with that, there was only one thing left to do, which was to finish up putting the build on Steam, which was a whole thing, a massive undertaking. Honestly, the entire Steam process was a whole lot. I'm going to make another video about all of that at some point, talking you through the types of things that you're going to have to prepare for, both mentally and literally, in order to do that, how I got through it. But yeah, I'll just cut through the Steam stuff and just say I put the game on Steam. And with the game on Steam, I was finally ready to do this and release the date that the game is coming out. I wanted it to be as close to when I announced it as possible because I'm so excited and I can't wait. So yeah, that's what I worked on. That's my game. That's Toby's Topsy Tale. This is Devlog 20. This is the final devlog. It's wild. Yeah, I'm gonna make a video at some point that's like a compilation of all of the devlogs, like all 20 of them for beginning to end. So I'm rambling. I'm excited. I can't wait for you to play this game that I've been working so long on. So please go wishlist on Steam, Toby's Topsy Tale. It'll come out October 17th. If you're not subscribed to this channel, please subscribe. I just got to like 2,500. I had 2,600 now, and I can't wait to keep making new content for you. I also want to make a tutorial series. I want to do more live streaming. I'm a firm believer that you can do anything if you put your mind to it and you're willing to put in the work and you're willing to learn. So I'm 3 Gnomes. Thank you so much for your support, and if no one's told you today, or if you need to hear it, you can do anything. If you made it this far, thank you for watching all of this. I hope you get a real sense for what it was like for me to make this game. And if you watched this far, please, please like and subscribe. So thank you so much, and I hope when the game comes out, if it's not out already, that you check it out. Thank you.